My name is Roberta Rossi. I am 34 years old. Exactly 3 days ago, I sat at the head of a polished mahogany table in the Human Resources boardroom of Manhattan's largest tech conglomerate, staring at a thick stack of termination papers. The woman my husband was sleeping with had just sent an anonymous whistleblower tip to my corporate compliance board, accusing me of embezzling $3 million. My own colleagues looked at me with profound disgust, ready to hand me over to federal authorities. My husband thought he had orchestrated a flawless coup to steal my assets, ruin my career, and secure his freedom. He had no idea he was dealing with a senior compliance director and a woman who had already mapped out his financial execution. Before I tell you how I burned his luxury real estate empire to the ground and made his mistress beg for mercy, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Samantha Told Stories. Let me know your age and where you are watching from in the comments below, because if you have ever had someone try to destroy your life, you are going to want to hear exactly how I dismantled theirs. To understand how a strict corporate auditor ended up in the crosshairs of a federal framing, you have to rewind exactly 72 hours. The chaotic symphony of Terminal 4 at JFK Airport smelled heavily of roasted espresso and stale jet fuel. I stood near the international arrivals gate, tracking the glowing flight boards. I was waiting for my father, Dominic. At 62 years old, my father still carried himself with the rigid, imposing posture of a retired FBI forensic accountant. He spent his entire career dismantling organized crime syndicates by tracing their hidden ledgers. He was the man who taught me to view the world through the clinical lens of debits, credits, and liabilities. He taught me that numbers never lie, even when people do. My husband, Nathan Pierce, was supposed to be 700 miles away in Chicago. Nathan was a charming, successful luxury real estate developer, hunting for a lucrative commercial zoning permit. He had kissed my forehead before dawn that morning, promising to call me from his hotel room as soon as he landed. I loved him with a quiet, steady certainty. We had been married for 5 years, and I trusted him enough to intertwine my pristine credit score with his ambitious business ventures. The automatic sliding glass doors of the international terminal parted with a soft mechanical hiss. I raised my hand, ready to wave at my father. The breath stalled in my lungs. The person walking through the terminal was not a retired federal agent returning from an overseas vacation. It was Nathan. He was not carrying his usual battered leather overnight duffel bag. He wore a crisp navy blazer and a relaxed linen shirt unbuttoned at the collar. His arm was wrapped intimately securely around the waist of a striking brunette. I recognized her instantly. It was Alyssa Thorne. She was the 29-year-old high-end interior designer his firm contracted to stage their multi-million-dollar penthouses. I had poured that woman espresso in my own kitchen just a month prior, while we discussed imported Italian marble for our bathroom renovation. She had smiled at me, complimenting my taste, while secretly sharing a bed with my husband. They paused near a dormant baggage carousel. Alyssa tilted her chin upward, and Nathan leaned down, pressing his lips to hers in a practiced, lingering embrace. It was not a clumsy, stolen kiss. It was a gesture of deep, familiar intimacy. It was the kiss of a man returning from a romantic getaway, not a stressed developer exhausted from a business trip. The ambient noise of the bustling airport faded into a dull, underwater drone. A cold, sharp ringing echoed in my ears. My fingertips went numb. I felt a sudden heavy pressure in my chest, as if a concrete block had been dropped onto my ribs. My eyes locked on his left hand, resting on the small of her back. The platinum wedding band I had placed on his finger 5 years ago caught the harsh fluorescent light. Operating on sheer primal instinct, my right hand reached across my body. I gripped my own diamond engagement ring, dragging the metal over my knuckle. The urge to storm across the polished linoleum and scream until my throat bled consumed every rational thought in my brain. I took a rigid half-step forward, ready to detonate my life in the middle of Terminal 4. A heavy, warm hand clamped down on my shoulder. I flinched, turning my head. Dominic stood right beside me. He had slipped through the crowd unnoticed, smelling faintly of cheap airline coffee and his signature sandalwood aftershave. He did not offer a sympathetic hug. He did not pull me into his chest and tell me everything would be okay. His dark eyes, sharp and analytical, tracked the couple near the carousel, then darted to my pale, trembling face. He read the tactical disadvantage of the situation in a fraction of a second. "Sweetheart," my father murmured, his voice a low, gravelly anchor cutting through the static in my mind. "Let us teach him a lesson he will never forget." Those 10 words flipped a heavy iron switch deep inside my psyche. The weeping betrayed wife receded into the shadows. The senior compliance director took the wheel. Panic was a luxury that cost victims everything. I could not afford to react. I needed to act. I retrieved my smartphone from the pocket of my trench coat. My hands were shaking, so I steadied my elbows against a concrete structural pillar. I zoomed the camera lens past the crowds of weary travelers. I framed the shot perfectly. The shutter clicked silently. I captured the tight embrace. Another click. His hand trailing down her back. A third click. The tender, deceitful kiss. I secured high-definition evidence and instantly uploaded the files to a secure encrypted cloud server. It was the first entry in a ledger that would eventually bankrupt his entire existence. I lowered the phone and looked down at the loose diamond ring resting in my damp palm. I could throw it at him. I could drop it into a trash can. Instead, I slid the heavy platinum band back onto my ring finger. It felt different now. It was no longer a promise of eternal fidelity. It was a tactical disguise. It was a sparkling symbol of the impending vengeance I was preparing to execute. I would play the loving, oblivious wife until the trap was perfectly primed. My phone vibrated against my palm. A text message from Nathan illuminated the glass screen. "Chicago is freezing. Flight delayed on the tarmac. Miss you. Go to sleep early." I read the fabricated words as he picked up Alyssa's designer suitcase and guided his mistress toward the taxi stand, heading back into the city. The sheer audacity of the lie settled into my bones, turning my grief into a cold, focused rage. The domestic ambush was in motion. Nathan truly believed he could strip my life down to the studs while keeping his own hands pristine. He thought he was outsmarting a naive corporate drone. He had no idea he just declared war on a forensic auditor. The ride from the airport back to Manhattan passed in total silence. Rain streaked the tinted windows of our town car, blurring the neon lights of the city skyline into jagged streaks of color. My father sat beside me, his hands resting on his knees, his jaw tight. We did not need to speak. The objective was clear. We rode the private elevator up to my penthouse, a sprawling, pristine space of glass and steel that I had furnished with the bonuses from my exhausting corporate audits. Dominic took a seat in the shadows of the living room, blending into the dark leather armchair, while I prepared for the performance of my life. 2 hours later, the front door unlocked. Nathan walked into the foyer, dropping his leather travel bag onto the marble floor with a heavy sigh. He rolled his shoulders, projecting the image of a weary executive returning from a grueling negotiation. I stepped out of the kitchen, holding 2 crystal tumblers of scotch. My pulse remained steady. I handed him a glass. As he leaned down to kiss my cheek, the faint, lingering scent of jasmine and sandalwood hit my senses. It was a boutique botanical perfume, expensive and distinct. I wore only subtle citrus notes. The scent of Alyssa Thorne was practically radiating off his collar. I smiled a thin, flawless curvature of my lips and asked him how Chicago was. Nathan unbuttoned his suit jacket and took a slow sip of his drink. He launched into a detailed, rehearsed narrative about the freezing wind whipping off Lake Michigan, the stubborn zoning board bureaucrats holding up his commercial permits, and the terrible room service at his hotel. He described a steak dinner he supposedly ate alone while reviewing blueprints. I listened to his smooth, confident voice, nodding at all the right intervals. Every word leaving his mouth was a calculated deception. He thought he was placating a tired, trusting wife. He was actually standing in front of a firing squad, blindfolded by his own arrogance. By midnight, the rhythmic, heavy breathing echoing from the master bedroom confirmed Nathan was in a deep sleep. I slipped out from under the duvet, wrapped a silk robe around my shoulders, and walked down the hall to the home office. Dominic was already there. The thick velvet curtains were drawn tight, and the only light came from the glowing screen of my father's encrypted laptop. I sat beside him, sliding Nathan's sleek silver computer across the desk. The sterile glow of the monitor cast long shadows across my father's face, triggering a vivid memory from 24 years ago. I was 10 years old, sitting at a cramped Formica table in our old Queens apartment. The air smelled of bitter black coffee and aged paper. Dominic, still wearing his federal badge and a wrinkled dress shirt, had spread a dozen bank statements across the table. I held a red pen in my small hand. He pointed a calloused finger at a minor discrepancy in the columns, guiding my eyes to the hidden theft. He told me that people will always manufacture elaborate stories to cover their tracks, weaving tales of bad luck and unfortunate circumstances. But he taught me that numbers never lie. A ledger is the ultimate truth. That late-night lesson forged a lethal, unspoken bond between us. I became an auditor to enforce the rules he spent his life protecting. Returning to the present, I pressed the power button on Nathan's laptop. My husband was a charming real estate developer, but his digital security was remarkably lazy. He used the exact same alphanumeric sequence for his personal devices that he used for his country club locker. I entered the code. The system unlocked instantly. Dominic and I went to work. We bypassed the standard banking portals and accessed the deep transaction histories of our joint accounts and personal credit lines. The numbers populated on the screen in stark, unforgiving rows. A cold, hollow dread settled in the pit of my stomach, quickly hardening into pure tactical focus. Nathan was not just funding weekend getaways with a mistress. He was executing a systematic financial extraction. A specific revolving line of credit, secured entirely against my immaculate professional credit score, was drained. $400,000 was missing. I traced the dates. The money had been withdrawn in structured increments kept just below the threshold that would trigger a federal banking alert. Nathan was leveraging my name, my reputation, and my hard-earned stability to fund his secret life. The emotional wound of the infidelity cauterized in that exact moment. The weeping wife died, replaced by the survival instinct of a cornered executive. This was a heist, and I was the mark. If Nathan realized I was auditing him, he would panic and move the remaining liquid capital into untraceable offshore accounts. We needed to keep him comfortable. We needed him to believe he was still the smartest person in the room. Dominic leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the desk. He suggested we provide Nathan with a decoy, a narrative that fit his own preconceived notions of my behavior. I remembered a minor argument we had 6 months prior when Nathan lost a few $1,000s betting on a professional golf tournament. I had expressed sharp disapproval, and he had defensively sworn off sports betting. It was the perfect vulnerability to exploit. I logged into my secure corporate network and sent a print command to the quiet laser printer in the corner of the office. The machine hummed, spitting out several pages of information. They were pamphlets and support group schedules for compulsive gambling addiction. I took the printed sheets and scattered them strategically across the top of my leather work planner. They were positioned just visibly enough to look like the careless mistake of a worried wife trying to hide her suspicions. The trap was set. At 7 the next morning, Nathan wandered into the study looking for his charging cable. I stood in the kitchen preparing coffee, tracking his movements through the mirrored backsplash behind the stove. I watched his reflection as the trap was set. At 7 the next morning, Nathan wandered into the study looking for his charging cable. I stood in the kitchen preparing coffee, tracking his movements through the mirrored backsplash behind the stove. I watched his reflection as he paused by my desk. His eyes snagged on the bold text of the gambling addiction pamphlets. For a fraction of a second, his posture stiffened. Then, the tension in his shoulders dissolved into profound, visible relief. A smug smirk flickered across his face. He thought I was digging into our finances because I suspected a sports betting relapse. He sighed, playing the part of a guilty man burdened by a manageable vice. He tucked his laptop under his arm, kissed my cheek, and left the penthouse with a confident, arrogant stride. He truly believed he controlled the narrative. He thought I was on the wrong trail, chasing shadows while he secured his future. With Nathan out of the penthouse, Dominic resumed the digital trace. He ran the routing numbers of the withdrawn $400,000 through a secure investigative database. The funds had not gone to any sportsbook casino or offshore betting syndicate. The money had been funneled through a nested series of domestic wire transfers, bouncing through dummy holding companies in Delaware before vanishing into a newly registered corporate account. My husband was laundering our marital wealth. The stakes elevated from a painful divorce to a fierce battle for my financial survival. I picked up Nathan's synced tablet, which he had left charging on the kitchen counter, and connected it to my encrypted network to extract his local files. As the data transferred, the screen flashed. A digital calendar notification slid across the top banner of the tablet, demanding immediate attention. The alert read, Adirondack Estate Independent Appraisal. A sharp chill radiated down my spine, freezing the blood in my veins. The 50-acre property in the upstate mountains was left to me by my late grandmother. The deed was solely in my name, a piece of ancestral legacy that Nathan had no legal claim to. If my husband was scheduling a quiet, independent appraisal of a property he did not own, the betrayal was escalating far beyond simple theft. He was preparing to leverage an asset that belonged exclusively to my bloodline. The next phase of his scheme was already in motion, and it required elaborate forgery. The glowing alert on Nathan's synced tablet stared back at me like a digital betrayal illuminating the sleek glass. It was a calendar notification for an independent real estate appraisal of my Adirondack estate. 50 acres of untouched pine forest and a sprawling timber lodge nestled in the upstate mountains comprised the only tangible connection I had left to my grandmother. She left that sanctuary exclusively to me. It was a sacred piece of my heritage, a quiet refuge where I spent childhood summers learning to fish and hike along the rocky streams. Nathan despised the rustic isolation of the property. He always preferred 5-star resorts and exclusive velvet ropes. Yet here was an electronic receipt for an independent real estate evaluation scheduled for the exact days he was supposedly shivering in Chicago securing zoning permits. Leaving my father in the kitchen to monitor the digital trace of our stolen funds, I walked into Nathan's home office. The room smelled of cedarwood and expensive leather upholstery. I systematically dismantled his workspace. I checked the heavy oak drawers, the filing cabinets, and the false bottom of his imported humidor. My hands moved with surgical precision, leaving zero trace of my intrusion. Sitting on the corner of his mahogany desk was a standard yellow legal notepad. The top page was entirely blank, but the afternoon light slanting through the window blinds caught a faint texture on the paper. Deep, rhythmic indentations scarred the smooth surface. My compliance training instantly recognized the physical residue of repeated high-pressure pen strokes leaking through from a torn-off sheet. I grabbed a soft graphite pencil from his silver pen cup. Holding the lead at a shallow angle, I swept the graphite gently back and forth across the blank page. The sound of the lead scratching against the paper filled the quiet room. The indented grooves remained white, while the surrounding paper darkened, revealing a chilling script. It was my own name, Roberta Rossi, repeated dozens of times. The loops and angles grew progressively more accurate as my husband practiced forging my identity. He intended to steal my ancestral home to satisfy the crushing luxury debts he incurred, funding his secret life with his interior designer. The scheduled appraisal meant the theft was already in motion. He needed a physical document to present to a buyer or a predatory lender. I dropped to my knees and pulled his backup leather briefcase from beneath the sofa. The brass locks clicked open with a soft mechanical snap. Inside, tucked beneath a stack of commercial zoning blueprints, lay a thick manila envelope. I slid out a heavy parchment document. It was a formalized power of attorney and a quitclaim deed granting Nathan Pierce unmitigated authority to liquidate the Adirondack property. My signature rested at the bottom, an immaculate replica of my actual handwriting. Beside the forgery was a bold blue ink stamp. The seal belonged to a licensed New York State notary public. My husband had bribed a corrupt official to authenticate a legal document without my presence. The sheer audacity of the crime stole the breath from my lungs. Nathan was not just a cheating spouse, he was an active felon, executing a calculated heist against his own wife. I stared at the blue notary seal, my mind calculating the fastest route to obliterate his scheme. I could destroy the paper right now, but Nathan would simply forge another one and hide it better. I needed him to walk into a legal trap of his own making. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond engagement ring he gave me 5 years ago sparkled under the warm desk lamp. I slipped the platinum band off my finger. Gripping the heavy stone between my thumb and index finger, I pressed the sharpest edge of the diamond directly into the center of the blue ink seal. With a microscopic precise motion, I etched a tiny, almost invisible cross into the raised emblem. It was a technicality most people would ignore, but any rigorous bank underwriter or title clerk would instantly flag the defaced seal, rendering the notarized document legally void. The very symbol of our broken marriage had just dismantled his exit strategy. I slid the forged deed back into the envelope and locked the briefcase, sliding it back into the shadows beneath the sofa. Returning to the kitchen, I pulled out my secure phone and dialed a trusted property lawyer I had known for a decade. I spoke in a hushed, rapid whisper, instructing him to immediately file a lis pendens against the Adirondack estate. This legal maneuver placed an invisible, impenetrable hold on the property title. Any attempt to sell, transfer, or leverage the estate would trigger an automatic block in the state registry. Nathan could parade his forged deed in front of all the shadow lenders he wanted. The asset was frozen, and he remained entirely oblivious to the titanium wall I just built around my inheritance. Before I could end the call with my attorney, the heavy thud of the front door unlocking echoed through the penthouse foyer. The metallic rattle of keys signaled Nathan's premature return. He was supposed to be touring a commercial site until dinner. My pulse hammered against my ribs. The adrenaline spiked hot and fast through my veins. Dominic seamlessly shut down his laptop, sliding the device beneath a stack of unopened mail on the kitchen island. I disconnected the call, grabbed a nearby stack of corporate compliance reports, and dropped onto one of the velvet bar stools. Nathan rounded the corner, loosening his silk tie. His leather dress shoes clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. His eyes darted around the room, assessing the atmosphere, looking for any sign of suspicion. I let out a long, theatrical sigh, rubbing my temples, as if fighting off a severe migraine. I did not look up from my paperwork right away. I forced the muscles in my face to relax, adopting the persona of an exhausted executive burdened by corporate deadlines. I complained about an upcoming audit at my tech conglomerate, blaming my frazzled appearance on incompetent junior analysts failing to reconcile their quarterly budgets. Nathan bought the performance instantly. The rigid tension in his jaw softened. He exhaled a breath of relief, walking over to kiss the top of my head. He offered to pour me a glass of wine, blind to the fact that his father-in-law had just mapped his impending ruin from the very same kitchen island. Later that night, the city slept, but my mind raced. I sat alone in the dim glow of my home office, seeking a distraction from the chaos of my collapsing marriage. I booted up my secure work terminal to review the vendor disbursement logs for a new corporate campus my company was building. It was routine compliance monitoring, a task I usually delegated to my subordinates, but I needed the familiar rhythm of spreadsheets to steady my nerves. I scrolled through the endless rows of external contractors, consulting firms, and material suppliers. My eyes scanned the alphanumeric routing codes, searching for standard operational irregularities to calm my anxiety. Then, a specific text string jumped off the glowing screen, freezing the blood in my veins. Aura Design Group. I stared at the vendor name, my heart sinking like a stone. That was the exact limited liability company Dominic had identified during our initial trace of the missing joint funds. It was the interior design startup owned by Alyssa Thorne. My husband's mistress was not just receiving stolen funds from our personal savings account. Her shell company was actively embedded inside my own employer's internal vendor network, receiving staggering monthly payouts for alleged staging services. The betrayal had crossed a devastating boundary. It jumped from personal financial theft to systemic corporate fraud. If the internal auditors at my conglomerate discovered this unauthorized money laundering occurring right under my nose, my CPA license would be revoked and my entire career would be placed in catastrophic jeopardy. The morning sun glared off the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office in the financial district. Below me, the Manhattan traffic crawled like a vein of yellow taxis and black town cars. Inside my sterile glass-walled domain, the air conditioning hummed a steady, monotonous rhythm. I sat at my executive desk, gripping a lukewarm cup of black coffee, staring at the glowing monitor. My position as Senior Compliance Director required me to oversee billions of dollars in international vendor disbursements for the tech conglomerate. I was the final gatekeeper for our corporate treasury. Yesterday, I spotted a familiar limited liability company buried in a routine expense report. Today, I needed to dissect the anatomy of the fraud. My husband was a cunning real estate developer who understood how to manipulate zoning boards and wealthy investors. He knew better than to bill my employer using a direct invoice from his mistress. That would trigger an automatic conflict of interest alert in our procurement software. Instead, Nathan utilized a sophisticated nested proxy. I traced the billing codes for a newly approved corporate campus construction project. Nathan had routed hundreds of thousands of dollars in supposed consulting services through a holding firm named Apex Holdings LLC. Apex Holdings was registered in Delaware, a state notorious for shielding corporate ownership. To a standard auditor, the paperwork looked immaculate. The invoices cited vague architectural staging fees and preliminary design evaluations. But I was not a standard auditor. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a secure encrypted flash drive Dominic had handed me over breakfast. My father had spent 30 years hunting white-collar criminals for the federal government. He maintained back-channel access to specialized forensic databases that pierced corporate veils with surgical precision. I plugged the drive into my terminal and ran the registered agent associated with Apex Holdings through the FBI routing software. The algorithm chewed through the data layers, peeling back the Delaware anonymity shield. The registered agent tied back to a dummy address in Brooklyn. That address belonged to a defunct warehouse currently leased by Alyssa Thorne. My chest tightened. The air in my spacious office suddenly felt thin. Nathan was not just siphoning our personal marital savings to spoil his interior designer. He was actively laundering money through my own workplace. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the internal corporate auditors or the Securities and Exchange Commission uncovered this embezzlement scheme, they would instantly assume I was a willing conspirator. My certified public accountant license would be revoked. My decade of hard-fought career advancement would burn to ash. I would face federal prosecution for facilitating corporate theft. My husband was willing to send me to a penitentiary to fund his illicit romance. Panic is a useless emotion. It clouds judgment and forces mistakes. I forced my breathing to slow, channeling my terror into calculated retaliation. I needed to stop the financial bleeding without alerting Nathan that I had discovered his trap. Taking a sip of the bitter coffee, I opened the master procurement dashboard. My administrative clearance granted me unilateral authority over all vendor accounts. I highlighted every single pending invoice submitted by Apex Holdings. Instead of rejecting the payments, which would instantly send an automated denial email to Nathan, I selected a different protocol. I flagged the entire vendor profile for a routine internal compliance review. This administrative maneuver quietly suspended all future payouts, placing the funds into a bureaucratic purgatory. Nathan could check the portal and see his invoices marked as processing. He would assume the accounting department was simply backed up with quarterly audits. He would not realize the pipeline was permanently capped until his creditors came knocking. Simultaneously, I began constructing an airtight digital defense. I generated a timestamp security report documenting my discovery of the anomalous billing patterns. I encrypted the file and archived it in an off-site server, establishing irrefutable proof that I acted as a vigilant whistleblower rather than an accomplice. My professional shield was secured. Just as I finalized the encryption sequence, my personal cell phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. The caller ID displayed an unknown local number. I pressed the answer button, holding the device to my ear. Roberta, it is Alyssa Thorne. Her voice was smooth, melodic, and dripping with a manufactured sweetness. She spoke with the breezy confidence of a woman who believed she held all the winning cards. My jaw clenched so tight my teeth ached. This was the woman I had photographed, wrapped around my husband at the airport. This was the woman whose dummy corporation was currently attempting to destroy my livelihood. I pressed the record button on my secondary desk phone, initiating a covert audio capture. "Hello, Alyssa," I replied, forcing my tone to project warmth and cheerful ignorance. "How is the design firm doing?" "Oh, we are incredibly busy," she laughed, a light, airy sound that grated against my nerves. "I am actually calling about the penthouse. Nathan mentioned you were thinking about refreshing the color palette in the master bedroom. I was looking at some imported silk draperies this morning and wanted to confirm your fabric preferences before I order the swatches." It was a blatant psychological strike. A territorial display masquerading as professional courtesy. She was calling my personal cell phone during business hours to discuss the intimate space where I slept with the man she was sleeping with. She wanted to assert her dominance, testing my boundaries from the shadows. "That is so thoughtful of you, Alyssa," I purred, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "I am leaning toward a deep slate gray for the drapes, something cool and grounded. Nathan always prefers darker tones when he rests." I heard a slight hesitation on the other end of the line. She did not expect me to sound so serene. I engaged her in a trivial conversation about thread counts and lighting fixtures for 10 excruciating minutes, documenting every syllable of her territorial intrusion. By the time I ended the call, I possessed high-quality audio evidence linking her directly to the renovation projects tied to the fraudulent corporate invoices. The drive back to the penthouse took 40 minutes through the dense Manhattan gridlock. Sitting in the back of the hired car, I watched the city blur past the rain-slicked windows. I replayed the conversation with Alyssa in my mind, analyzing her inflections and her subtle provocations. She thought she was manipulating a blind domestic partner. She failed to comprehend that she had just handed a forensic investigator the exact audio verification needed to tie her design firm to the pending embezzlement lawsuit. I felt a cold thrill of anticipation. I packed my briefcase, anticipating a quiet evening to review the day's intelligence with my father. The ride up the private elevator felt remarkably calm. I had successfully paralyzed my husband's corporate laundering apparatus and secured my own innocence. I unlocked the heavy oak front door of my residence, ready to pour a glass of wine and strategize the next phase of the counteroffensive. I stepped into the foyer and froze. Sitting gracefully on my ivory sofa, sipping tea from my favorite porcelain cup, was Patricia Pierce. Nathan's mother was a formidable 64-year-old woman who reigned over a sprawling Hamptons estate and a rigid social circle. She wore a tailored tweed blazer and an expression of perpetual judgment. Patricia came from generations of inherited wealth, viewing my working-class queen's upbringing as a permanent stain on her family lineage. She never visited Manhattan without a formal invitation and a specific agenda. Her sudden, unannounced arrival signaled a dangerous shift in the battlefield. A deeply personal layer of betrayal had just walked through my front door, bringing an entirely new storm into my home. Patricia Pierce sat on my ivory sofa with her legs crossed tightly at the ankle. She surveyed the penthouse she always considered too modern for her aristocratic sensibilities. The matriarch of the Pierce family possessed a gaze that could strip the paint off a luxury vehicle. She belonged to a vanishing breed of generational wealth women who wielded their trust funds like blunt instruments while maintaining a veneer of perfect etiquette. Her sudden presence in my home was no coincidence. She was the architect of her son's entitlement, and tonight she was here to inspect the demolition of my life. I maintained a serene expression, playing the gracious host. I poured a crisp Sauvignon Blanc into her crystal glass, watching the pale liquid catch the ambient light of the chandelier. Dominic sat at the opposite end of the dining table, chewing his steak with calculated, deliberate silence. My father had interrogated cartel bosses and corrupt senators during his tenure at the Bureau. He recognized a fellow predator sitting across from him, but he kept his demeanor neutral, playing the role of the quiet, retired accountant visiting his daughter. The dinner conversation felt like navigating a minefield blindfolded. Patricia sliced a small piece of filet mignon, bringing it to her lips before turning her sharp eyes toward me. She lamented my demanding schedule at the tech conglomerate, implying that a proper wife should prioritize her household over a corporate ledger. She wove insults into compliments with terrifying skill, expressing pity that I spent my youth staring at spreadsheets instead of providing her with an heir. I smiled, swallowed my wine, and agreed that my career was indeed taxing, giving her nothing to strike against. Then she pivoted to the real agenda. "Nathan, darling," Patricia said, tapping her manicured fingernail against the rim of her wineglass. "You really must do something about that archaic property in the Adirondacks. It is a dilapidated money pit, far too rustic and worthless for your portfolio." My pulse skipped a single beat. The Adirondack cabin belonged solely to me, inherited from my grandmother. For Patricia to bring it up in casual dinner conversation meant she was fully aware of Nathan's plot to forge my signature and liquidate the estate. She was laying the psychological groundwork, testing my attachment to the property, pushing her son to finalize the theft. Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearing his throat, assuring his mother that he was handling the real estate portfolio. I needed unvarnished intelligence. I needed them to speak freely, without my presence suppressing their true intentions. As the dessert course concluded, I stood up and offered to brew a fresh pot of espresso. I gathered the empty plates and retreated to the kitchen. Slipping my smartphone from my pocket, I activated a high-definition audio recording application. I wedged the device discreetly behind a heavy marble mortar and pestle on the center island, ensuring the microphone faced the dining room. I announced that I needed to fetch a specific brand of coffee beans from the pantry down the hall, taking Dominic with me to retrieve a non-existent vintage port wine. The moment we were out of earshot, the polite facade in the dining room evaporated. 10 minutes later, I returned, served the espresso, and endured the remainder of Patricia's visit. Once she finally retreated to the guest suite for the evening, Dominic and I slipped into my home office. I retrieved my phone, locked the heavy oak door, and pressed play. The audio playback hissed softly before Patricia's voice cut through the quiet room, stripped of all her previous performative warmth. "She is oblivious," Nathan Patricia stated, her tone sharp and urgent on the recording. "But you must move faster. Alyssa is growing impatient." "I know, Mother," Nathan replied, his voice laced with nervous exhaustion. "I am securing the capital. It takes time to structure the proxies." "You do not have time," Patricia snapped. "I just wired the security deposit for Alyssa's new flat on the Upper East Side. She belongs in our social circle. She understands the expectations of this family, not a working-class number cruncher who thinks a paycheck equals pedigree. Drain the remaining liquid assets, isolate her accounts, and blindside her with the divorce filings by Friday. Leave her with nothing to bargain with." The recording clicked off. The betrayal cut through bone and marrow. This was not merely a husband straying from his marital vows. This was a coordinated familial conspiracy. The woman who had toasted at my wedding, who had kissed my cheek during the holidays, was actively funding my replacement. She was financing the mistress's luxury apartment while coaching her son to leave me destitute. A deep, hollow ache bloomed in my chest, a profound grief for the family I thought I possessed. I looked up at Dominic. The retired federal agent did not offer hollow platitudes. He pulled his encrypted laptop from his leather satchel, his jaw set in a rigid line of pure tactical rage. "Give me her full legal name and her primary trust routing identifiers." Dominic commanded his fingers, hovering over the illuminated keyboard. I recited Patricia's details. Dominic accessed a secure background terminal he maintained from his days on the financial task force. He initiated a deep digital trace, hunting the money trail connecting the wealthy matriarch to the young interior designer. The algorithm sifted through thousands of banking records, isolating the targeted variables. Within 20 minutes, a digital document rendered on the screen. It was a commercial lease agreement for a premium high-rise apartment. The monthly rent was staggering. Listed as the primary tenant was Alyssa Thorne. Listed as the sole financial guarantor assuming full liability for the luxury residence was Patricia Pierce. The digital signature matched the matriarch perfectly. The conspiracy was undeniable. They had built an entire illicit ecosystem using my blind trust as the foundation. While Dominic finalized the evidence export, a soft floorboard creaked in the hallway outside my office. I switched off the desk lamp, plunging the room into darkness, and cracked the door open a fraction of an inch. Down the hall, the door to Nathan's study was ajar. I crept silently along the corridor, pressing my back against the cool plaster wall, peering into his domain. The sterile blue light of his desktop monitor washed over his face, casting deep, frantic shadows across his features. He was logging into his corporate vendor portals, desperately trying to check the status of his delayed payouts. He needed cash to satisfy Patricia's demands and to keep Alyssa appeased. I watched his reflection in the dark window pane behind his desk. He clicked the mouse. The screen refreshed. A bold red notification banner appeared across his dashboard. It read, "Vendor profile suspended, routine internal compliance review." The financial pipeline he had built to siphon funds from my tech conglomerate was officially shut down. Nathan froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a bespoke suit. He clicked the refresh button repeatedly, his index finger hammering the mouse in a frantic rhythm. The error message remained. His primary laundering source was severed. He had zero access to the corporate embezzlement funds, and I had already drained the joint savings he intended to steal. He picked up his phone, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device. He dialed a number, holding the receiver to his ear. I strained to hear his hushed, panicked whispers. He was speaking to a high-priced defense attorney. He explained that his liquidity was compromised, that he needed immediate access to the physical financial documents locked in my penthouse safe to secure a high-risk bridge loan. But he knew I would never hand over those documents voluntarily. He needed me gone. He needed exclusive, unrestricted access to the residence, and he needed it before sunrise. Nathan hung up the phone and opened a blank legal template on his computer. I watched his eyes narrow, a dark, vicious desperation taking hold of his posture. He began typing furiously, fabricating a narrative designed to weaponize the legal system against me. He was drafting a weapon meant to physically force me out of my own home. A tactical strike intending to leave me stranded on the sidewalk with nothing but the clothes on my back. The dawn broke over the Manhattan skyline in bruised shades of violet and gray. I sat at my kitchen island with a cup of black coffee, watching the city slowly illuminate through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Sleep was a distant memory. My father and I had spent the pre-dawn hours dissecting the audio recording of Patricia Pierce, charting the financial arteries connecting the matriarch to Alyssa Thorne's luxury apartment lease. The depth of the betrayal demanded a level of cold calculation I had previously reserved for corporate audits. Around 8 o'clock, a sharp chime resonated from Dominic's encrypted tablet resting on the marble counter. It was a digital tripwire. Through his residual network of federal contacts and court clerks, Dominic had placed a monitoring flag on my name in the New York State Judicial Database. My father tapped the screen, pulling up a scanned document bearing a judge's fresh signature. It was an ex parte restraining order. In the legal realm, an ex parte motion is a ruthless weapon. It requires only one party to present their narrative to a judge, bypassing the need for the accused to defend themselves prior to the execution of the mandate. Nathan had sworn, under penalty of perjury, that my demanding corporate workload had triggered a severe psychotic break. He fabricated a harrowing tale, stating that, at exactly 2 in the afternoon yesterday, I suffered a mental collapse in our living room. He claimed I shattered a crystal whiskey decanter against the wall, screamed unhinged threats, and endangered his physical safety. The requested remedy was immediate and severe. He wanted the New York Police Department to forcibly remove me from the premises, barring me from my own residence. I saw his strategy with crystalline clarity. Nathan did not fear me. He feared his frozen corporate payouts. He needed unrestricted access to the biometric wall safe hidden behind the master bedroom armoire. That steel box held our emergency cash reserves, a collection of vintage timepieces, and the original untampered deed to the Adirondack estate. He intended to strip the apartment bare while I scrambled to find a hotel room and hire a defense attorney. It was a calculated strike, designed to leave me destitute, disoriented, and locked out on the pavement with a single suitcase. I did not let the terror of impending eviction cloud my judgment. I walked over to the central smart home interface, mounted in the hallway corridor. When we renovated the penthouse 2 years ago, Nathan insisted on high-definition security cameras covering the entryways and main living spaces to protect his imported art collection. He conveniently forgot that I managed the cloud storage subscriptions. I pulled up the archive for yesterday afternoon. I scrolled to exactly 2 o'clock. The living room footage showed only the afternoon sunlight shifting across the hardwood floors. Our housekeeper Maria was quietly dusting the bookshelves and watering the orchids. There was no shattered crystal. There was no screaming wife. Furthermore, my corporate calendar and the recorded minutes of my tech conglomerate's quarterly compliance review placed me precisely 3 miles away at that exact moment. I was sitting in a glass boardroom, surrounded by 12 executive witnesses, discussing vendor disbursements. At 10:15, Heavy footsteps echoed down the private corridor outside the penthouse. A sharp, authoritative knock rattled the oak doorframe. I smoothed the wrinkles from my tailored charcoal pencil skirt, adjusted the collar of my silk blouse, and opened the door. 2 uniformed officers stood in the hallway, their hands resting cautiously near their utility belts. Their postures were rigid, expecting to confront the hysterical, dangerous woman described in the court filing. "Good morning, officers. How may I help you?" I asked, keeping my vocal tone modulated, polite, and steady. The lead officer, a seasoned veteran with graying temples and a sharp gaze, held up a manila folder. He stated they were here to serve a court order and escort me off the property. I stepped aside, inviting them into the bright, pristine foyer. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear of panic. Instead, I gestured toward the kitchen island where my tablet was waiting. "I understand my husband filed a distressing report regarding my behavior yesterday afternoon," I said, handing the lead officer the device. "I believe there has been a profound misunderstanding." The screen displayed a split view. On the left was the unedited time-stamped security footage of our pristine, empty living room at the exact moment the alleged assault occurred. On the right was an authenticated PDF of my corporate meeting minutes signed by the chief executive officer of my firm, confirming my presence in the financial district. I let the officers watch the silent footage. The tension in the foyer evaporated, replaced by the distinct, irritated realization of men who knew they were being manipulated. Police officers despise being used as pawns in domestic disputes, especially when the instigator fabricates a crisis to exploit their authority. The veteran officer handed the tablet back to me. His jaw tightened, and he let out a slow exhale. Filing a false police report and committing perjury on a sworn affidavit to secure a protective order is a severe criminal offense. He apologized for the intrusion, his tone shifting from authoritative enforcement to professional sympathy. He documented the digital evidence on his notepad, advising me to retain the footage and contact my legal counsel immediately. The authorities retreated down the hall, leaving the fraudulent eviction order sitting uselessly on my credenza. The threat was neutralized without a single raised voice. Dominic walked out from the guest corridor, picking up the court document. He read Nathan's forged signature at the bottom of the page and shook his head, dropping the paper into the recycling bin. The trap was primed. Now we just had to wait for the prey to walk into the snare. I brewed a pot of Earl Grey tea, the aromatic steam filling the kitchen, masking the scent of impending ruin. My father and I took our seats at the long dining table. The polished mahogany surface was clear, except for 2 teacups and a single manila folder holding the airport photographs and the pencil-shaded forgery evidence. I sat in silence, reflecting on the man I married. I used to wait for the sound of his key in the lock with a sense of domestic comfort. Now I waited with the calculated patience of a sniper. The husband I loved was a fiction, a charming mask hiding a hollow, desperate thief. Just past noon, the brass deadbolt clicked. The heavy door swung open. Nathan stepped into the foyer. He carried a heavy canvas duffel bag over his shoulder, clearly expecting to find the locks changed, the alarm deactivated, and his wife banished to the streets. He paused, closing the door behind him with a soft thud. He let out a long breath, a sigh of anticipated triumph. He likely pictured a smooth, uninterrupted ransacking of the master bedroom safe to secure his shadow loan. He rounded the corner into the dining room. His gaze landed on me. The leather strap of his duffel bag slipped from his shoulder, hitting the floor with a heavy, echoing thud. The color drained from his face so fast he looked physically ill. His eyes darted wildly around the room, searching for the police officers, searching for the chaos he had orchestrated. Instead, he found a perfectly ordered room. I sat at the head of the table, sipping my tea, watching his reality shatter. Dominic sat to my right, his posture relaxed, but radiating the silent, lethal authority of a seasoned federal investigator. Nathan opened his mouth, but his vocal cords refused to produce a sound. He blinked, trying to process the impossibility of my presence. He had fired his best tactical shot, utilizing the legal system to eliminate me, and the weapon had misfired spectacularly. The dynamic shifted with the weight of a tectonic plate. He was no longer the cunning predator manipulating his naive partner. He was a cornered animal, realizing all the exits were sealed. The air in the penthouse grew thick, suffocating his arrogance, paving the way for the financial devastation I was about to unleash. Nathan stood paralyzed, his custom Italian leather shoes rooted to the imported rug. His eyes flickered between my father and me, his brain struggling to process the catastrophic failure of his eviction plot. He had expected to find a weeping, broken woman, hastily packing a suitcase under the stern supervision of law enforcement. Instead, he found a quiet, deliberate tribunal waiting for him in his own dining room. I reached into the manila folder resting on the polished mahogany surface. My fingers pinched the edges of 3 glossy photographs. With a swift flick of my wrist, I sent them gliding across the table. They stopped mere inches from his fingertips. The high-definition images from Terminal 4 captured every deceitful angle of his embrace with Alyssa Thorne. The crisp focus illuminated the weave of his tailored navy blazer and the distinct, satisfied curve of her smile. I did not wait for him to formulate a fabricated excuse. I withdrew the second piece of evidence. The yellow legal paper, shaded with graphite to reveal the indented grooves of my forged signature, followed the photographs across the wood. Nathan looked down. The blood rushed back into his face, flushing his cheeks with a dark, primal panic. Nathan Pierce was born into a world where consequences were abstract concepts meant for other people. His mother, Patricia, had spent his entire childhood writing checks to erase his mistakes and smooth his path. As a result, when confronted with irrefutable proof of his own deceit, his psychological defense mechanism was not remorse. It was immediate, feral aggression. He planted his hands on the edge of the dining table, leaning his tall frame forward in a pathetic attempt at physical intimidation. "You think this proves anything?" Nathan sneered, his voice dropping into a menacing theatrical register. "You are an overworked compliance director hallucinating conspiracies. If you try to drag my name through the mud, I will march directly into your corporate headquarters. I will tell your executive board that you authorized those vendor payouts. I will testify that you orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme to fund your own lavish lifestyle. Who do you think a jury will believe? The charming developer or the bitter, unstable wife who just had a psychiatric episode?" He was attempting to gaslight me in real time, threatening to detonate my career if I did not submit to his fabricated narrative. I took a slow, measured sip of my Earl Grey tea, placing the porcelain cup back onto its saucer with a soft clink. "You are welcome to try, Nathan," I replied, my tone devoid of any emotional fluctuation. "However, you will find it quite difficult to hire a defense attorney to facilitate that perjury." My father, Dominic, remained silent, but he reached into his leather satchel and withdrew a thick, spiral-bound legal dossier. He slid it across the table, placing it directly on top of the airport photographs. "At 9 o'clock this morning," I explained, gesturing to the dossier, "my legal team filed an emergency counter-injunction in the state Supreme Court. We presented the presiding judge with the graphite forgery evidence, the audio recording of your mother conspiring to hide marital assets, and the digital forensic trail of your corporate embezzlement. The judge was remarkably swift in her ruling." Nathan stared at the document, his bravado beginning to splinter under the weight of the legal seals. "That document is a comprehensive asset preservation order," I continued, interlocking my fingers on the table. "As of 30 minutes ago, every single personal checking account, corporate operating fund, and offshore brokerage portfolio tied to your Social Security number is frozen." Your credit cards are deactivated. Your revolving lines of debt are suspended. You possess zero liquid capital. The realization struck him like a physical blow. He snatched the dossier, flipping through the dense pages. The bold black ink of the judge's signature confirmed his financial paralysis. Stripped of his leverage, the polished executive dissolved into a cornered fugitive. He cursed under his breath, grabbed his canvas duffel bag, and stormed out of the penthouse. He slammed the heavy oak door so hard the framed architectural prints on the walls rattled against the plaster. He assumed he could seek refuge in the arms of his devoted mistress. He assumed their illicit romance could weather a temporary cash flow problem. He was profoundly mistaken. When Dominic searched Nathan's briefcase the previous evening, my father did not merely inspect the forged Adirondack deed. Drawing upon his decades of federal surveillance experience, Dominic had concealed a micro-audio transmitter inside the lining of the leather bag. We did not need to follow Nathan down the street. We simply walked into my home office, initiated the encrypted receiver software, and listened as his reality unraveled. The digital audio feed crackled, transmitting the sounds of Manhattan traffic as Nathan took a taxi to the Upper East Side. We heard the chime of an elevator and the unlocking of a door. Alyssa Thorne greeted him with practiced affection, her voice a sugary melody echoing through her luxury apartment. "Did you get her out?" Alyssa asked, the eagerness in her tone cutting through the static. Nathan evaded the question, his breathing ragged. He suggested they order an extravagant dinner to calm his nerves. We listened as he dialed an exclusive sushi restaurant, requesting their most expensive tasting menu. A moment later, the automated payment system engaged. "Sir, this card has been declined," the restaurant concierge stated over the speakerphone. Nathan cursed, hastily reciting the numbers of a secondary platinum card. "Declined again, sir." The line went dead. The silence in Alyssa's apartment grew suffocating. The illusion of the wealthy, untouchable developer evaporated in the span of 2 failed transactions. "Nathan, what is going on?" Alyssa demanded. Her voice stripped away the manufactured sweetness, revealing the sharp, calculating interior designer who viewed romance as a financial transaction. "Why are your cards declining? Did you secure the penthouse or not?" She froze the accounts, Nathan admitted, his voice cracking with desperation. Roberta found the vendor invoices. She found the forged deed. A judge locked everything down. We heard the distinct sound of Alyssa taking several steps backward. The unconditional love she promised him was entirely contingent on his credit limit. The soft, curated aesthetic of the supportive mistress vanished, replaced by the calculating panic of a co-conspirator facing federal exposure. "You told me she was a clueless corporate drone." Alyssa hissed, the venom in her voice unmistakable. "My name is on that dummy corporation. If they trace those invoices, I am implicated in corporate fraud. You need to fix this right now, or you can pack your bag and leave my apartment." The ultimate betrayal within the syndicate had commenced. Faced with impending ruin, the mistress instantly turned on the master. Nathan retreated to a quiet corner of the apartment. The audio transmitter captured the frantic tapping of his fingers on a phone screen. Since his primary devices were likely monitored by the courts, he powered up a cheap, untraceable prepaid burner phone he kept hidden for illicit communications. Dominic, anticipating this exact maneuver, had already deployed a signal interception protocol. Using a localized cellular network diagnostic tool from his federal task force days, my father isolated the specific radio frequency emanating from the burner device within the apartment's geographic coordinates. Code cascaded across Dominic's monitor as he bypassed the encryption layer, giving us a live transcript of Nathan's outbound call. My husband did not call a defense attorney. He called a fixer. "I need a bridge loan," Nathan whispered frantically into the receiver. $1 million. Immediate liquidity. I have collateral. "Traditional banking is closed to you, Pierce," a raspy, distorted voice replied on the other end. If you want fast cash, you have to step outside the regulatory lines. I can connect you with Vanguard Capital. They are a shadow private equity group, unregulated distressed debt syndicates, but their terms are unforgiving. Set the meeting, Nathan demanded without hesitation. I am using a 50-acre Adirondack estate as the guarantee. The deed is ready. The call disconnected, leaving a hollow static echoing in my home office. I stared at the glowing monitor, a sharp, icy terror mingling with profound anticipation. A shadow private equity firm operates in the dark crevices of the financial sector. They do not file civil lawsuits when a debtor defaults. They deploy collection specialists who operate far outside the bounds of the law. They ruin lives, seize assets by force, and thrive on the desperation of cornered men. Nathan was entirely locked out of the traditional banking system. To maintain his facade and appease his furious mistress, he was willingly walking into a slaughterhouse. He intended to sign his life away to dangerous lenders using a forged deed that I had already legally blocked with an invisible court order. The moment those predators realized the collateral was worthless, my husband would face a consequence far worse than a simple divorce. The annual Manhattan Skyline Gala was an exercise in curated deception. Held in the grand ballroom of a legendary Fifth Avenue hotel, the event served as a glittering facade where heavily leveraged developers pretended to possess infinite capital. Men in custom tuxedos and women draped in borrowed diamonds mingled under crystal chandeliers, sipping vintage champagne while negotiating phantom deals. It was the perfect ecosystem for a desperate man. Despite his frozen bank accounts and suspended credit lines, my husband understood that in the world of luxury real estate, perception dictated reality. If he hid in his apartment, his creditors would smell blood. He needed to project invincibility. He needed to secure private investors for a ghost commercial project to generate enough unrecorded cash to survive the coming storm. He brought his interior designer to complete the illusion. I did not receive an invitation to the gala. I did not need one. As a senior executive at a prominent tech conglomerate, my presence was expected at these functions. I spent 2 hours preparing for this specific deployment. I chose a floor-length emerald green silk gown with a plunging neckline and a razor-sharp silhouette. It was a garment designed to command attention, a piece of wearable armor. I paired it with diamond drop earrings and the platinum wedding band I still wore on my left hand. The ring was no longer a symbol of matrimony. It was a tactical prop. Stepping out of my hired town car, I handed my coat to the valet and walked into the hotel lobby. The ambient hum of a string quartet drifted down the marble corridors. I ascended the grand staircase leading to the main ballroom. As I reached the landing, the sea of attendees naturally parted. Eyes flickered in my direction. Whispers rippled through the crowd. I scanned the room with the clinical detachment of an auditor surveying a ledger. It took less than a minute to locate them. Nathan stood near a towering ice sculpture, holding a highball glass, animatedly pitching a conceptual architectural rendering on his tablet to 3 prominent private equity investors. Alyssa stood at his side, wearing a daring crimson dress that screamed for attention rather than commanding it. She clung to his bicep, flashing rehearsed smiles, playing the role of the supportive partner. I glided across the ballroom floor, my heels sinking silently into the plush carpet. I did not rush. I allowed the anticipation to build. As I approached their circle, one of the older investors, a patriarch of a distinguished holding firm, noticed me. He raised his glass in a polite greeting. Nathan paused his pitch, turning his head to see what had captured the investor's attention. The polished confidence drained from Nathan's face the instant our eyes met. His jaw tightened and his knuckles turned white around his glass. He tried to recover, plastering a stiff, terrified smile onto his lips. He introduced me to the group, his voice strained, attempting to frame my arrival as a pleasant surprise. I smiled warmly at the investors, extending my hand in greeting. I apologized for interrupting the pitch, citing a pressing need to discuss a critical liability associated with Nathan's current portfolio. The men leaned in, their financial instincts triggered by the word liability. I kept my voice modulated, pleasant, and conversational. I mentioned that Nathan might have forgotten to disclose a few recent developments regarding his liquidity. I casually cited a severe seven-figure margin debt call that triggered a judicial asset freeze at 9 o'clock this morning. I noted that his primary corporate accounts were currently suspended, pending a federal compliance review for vendor embezzlement. I dropped specific routing codes and exact dollar amounts, speaking the language of risk analysis. The investors were seasoned veterans of Wall Street. They did not need to see a subpoena to recognize a sinking ship. The mention of frozen assets in compliance reviews acted like a toxic repellent. The patriarch of the holding firm cleared his throat, suddenly remembering a pressing engagement across the room. The other two men offered stiff nods and hastily retreated. Within 30 seconds, Nathan lost every potential lifeline he had spent the evening trying to cultivate. The social exile was swift and brutal. Nathan stood frozen, his architectural tablet hanging uselessly in his hand. Alyssa, however, lacked the financial literacy to understand the severity of what just occurred. Driven by petty territorial instincts, she decided to mount a counterattack. She stepped forward, her posture rigid, a mocking sneer twisting her features. She insulted my corporate attire, suggesting I belonged in a dreary cubicle rather than a high society gala. She boasted about her thriving design firm, claiming her creative vision was the true driving force behind Nathan's real estate success. She attempted to publicly humiliate me, trying to reassert her dominance in the wake of the fleeing investors. I turned my gaze slowly toward her, offering a look of profound, chilling pity. I did not raise my voice to match her shrill tone. I simply began dissecting her professional identity piece by piece. I complimented her dummy corporation or a design group, noting how impressive it was to secure lucrative corporate staging contracts without possessing a single piece of physical inventory. I asked her how the logistics worked out of her registered business address, specifically citing the dilapidated abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn that Dominic had uncovered during our digital trace. I commended her ability to generate high six-figure invoices for consulting services that were never rendered. I mentioned the impending corporate fraud lawsuit my legal department was drafting against her shell company. The blood vanished from Alyssa's face. Her lips parted in a silent gasp. The realization that I had pierced her corporate veil and possessed irrefutable proof of her complicity paralyzed her. The surrounding guests, drawn by the escalating tension, lingered just close enough to overhear the devastation. The whispering intensified. Alyssa realized she was not just losing a wealthy lover. She was facing total professional ruin and potential incarceration. I did not linger to watch them suffer the awkward, suffocating silence. I delivered a final polite nod to my husband and his mistress, wishing them luck with their upcoming legal defenses. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit, leaving them stranded in the center of the ballroom. They were entirely isolated, marked as toxic pariahs in a room full of apex predators. I retrieved my coat from the valet and stepped out into the cool, crisp Manhattan night air. The city lights reflected off the wet pavement. I took a deep breath, savoring the crisp taste of victory. The trap had functioned flawlessly. Just as I signaled for my driver, my secure smartphone vibrated in my clutch. I pulled the device out and swiped the screen. The notification displayed a text message from an unknown encrypted number. The characters glowed against the dark screen. The message contained only 2 sentences. Bridge loan application approved by Vanguard Capital and the Adirondack collateral has been secured. A sharp, icy thrill shot down my spine. Nathan, locked out of the traditional banking world and desperate to survive the financial starvation I just engineered, had officially crossed the point of no return. He finalized the transaction with the shadow private equity firm. The predatory lenders had entered the battlefield, bringing a dangerous, high-stakes element into the war. The domestic dispute was over. The syndicate phase had begun. The encrypted message illuminated the dark interior of my hired town car. The characters glowed against the screen, signaling the successful execution of the most perilous phase of our operation. Nathan Pierce, stripped of his traditional safety nets, had officially crossed into the unregulated wilderness of shadow finance. He traded his future for a briefcase of untraceable currency. Nathan believed his maneuver was flawless. He delivered the forged Adirondack title to Vanguard Capital, assuming the elegant parchment would satisfy their stringent collateral mandates. The irony was profound and lethal. Due to the invisible judicial block my property attorney filed earlier that week, the deed held less value than a discarded newspaper. Nathan signed a binding draconian contract with predatory lenders, using an asset he could not legally leverage. He handed them an empty promise and absorbed their $1 million. 48 hours later, the physical ramifications of that ghost transaction materialized. I spotted them during my afternoon coffee run. A pair of imposing men, wearing tailored but unremarkable suits, lingered near the revolving glass doors of my corporate headquarters. They possessed the distinct, calculated posture of collection agents who operated far outside the parameters of civil litigation. They did not approach me. They did not speak. They simply stood in my line of sight, ensuring I registered their presence. It was a textbook intimidation tactic, engineered to rattle a debtor by tracking their spouse. A cold shiver cascaded down my spine. I understood the theoretical risks of financial warfare, but introducing physical enforcers into my daily routine was an unpredictable variable. I bypassed my afternoon meetings and hurried back to the penthouse to consult my father. I found Dominic standing at the kitchen island, meticulously peeling an orange. I recounted the incident with the men outside my building. I suggested we utilize his former colleagues at the bureau to arrange a temporary security detail. Dominic set his paring knife on the marble counter and let out a rich, genuine chuckle. The sound echoed through the quiet foyer, entirely devoid of concern. He wiped his hands on a linen towel and opened his encrypted laptop. He explained that during the late 1980s, he spent 3 grueling years deeply embedded within a prominent New York crime syndicate. He operated under a meticulously fabricated alias, building a flawless reputation as a corrupt, silent financier named Vincent Corelli. The federal government never officially dismantled that identity. They simply retired it to the archives. When Dominic traced Nathan's frantic burner phone communications to Vanguard Capital, he realized the distressed debt firm was managed by former associates who still respected the Corelli legacy. My father leaned against the counter, a proud glint illuminating his eyes. He did not merely monitor the shadow loan, he orchestrated it. Resurrecting his dormant undercover persona, Dominic posed as the silent partner underwriting the $1 million disbursement. Vanguard Capital processed the paperwork, but the capital originated from a decentralized trust Dominic controlled. The men standing outside my corporate office were not syndicate enforcers. They were licensed private investigators my father hired to play a specific role. They were instructed to look imposing and trigger Nathan's escalating paranoia. My husband firmly believed he owed his life to ruthless, untouchable loan sharks. In reality, he had surrendered his written confession, his forged documents, and his final shred of leverage directly into the hands of his own father-in-law. The psychological pressure cooker reached its boiling point the following evening. I stayed late at the office, finalizing quarterly compliance reports, to clear my schedule for the impending fallout. The subterranean parking garage was desolate. Flickering fluorescent bulbs cast long, distorted shadows across the concrete pillars. The air hung heavy, smelling of damp pavement and motor oil. As I approached my designated parking space, a figure stepped out from behind a concrete column, blocking my path to the vehicle. It was Nathan. He looked dreadful. His bespoke suit was wrinkled and stained with perspiration. His tie was missing his collar unbuttoned and his hair disheveled. The confident, polished real estate developer who swaggered through VIP airport terminals was gone. In his place stood a frantic, hollow shell of a man, teetering on the precipice of a nervous breakdown. He rushed toward me, his hands raised in a placating, desperate gesture. I maintained my distance, slipping my right hand into my coat pocket, my fingers wrapped around my smartphone, my thumb resting over the screen. With a single practiced swipe, I activated the high-definition voice memo application. He begged me to stop walking. His voice trembled, echoing off the concrete walls in a pathetic cadence. He explained that Vanguard Capital attempted to officially register the Adirondack deed that morning. Their underwriters discovered the legal block anchoring the property title. The lenders realized the collateral was frozen, rendering their contract void. "They are going to kill me, Roberta," he pleaded, his eyes wide with unadulterated terror. "They gave me 48 hours to produce the $1 million in cash or transfer a clean title. You have to lift the hold. Please, I will sign whatever divorce papers you want. I will walk away with nothing. Just release the cabin so I can pay them back." I stared at the man I once vowed to spend my life with. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I observed his panic with the clinical detachment of a scientist watching a specimen react to a stimulus. "You took an unregulated loan from a shadow firm," I stated, keeping my voice steady and clear to ensure the microphone captured every syllable. "You used a property you do not own as leverage." "I had no choice," he stammered, running a shaking hand through his hair. "You froze all my accounts. Alyssa was threatening to leave me. I needed the cash to stay afloat. I thought I could flip a commercial property and pay them back before they ever checked the title." "You forged my signature, Nathan." I pressed the issue, guiding him into the snare. "You paid a corrupt notary to stamp a fraudulent document." "I did it because I was desperate." He admitted the crime without hesitation, his survival instincts overriding any legal caution. "Yes, I forged the deed. Yes, I took the illegal loan. I will admit to all of it in court if you just lift the hold right now." "They sent guys to my hotel. They know where I sleep. You have to save me." He dropped to his knees on the filthy garage floor, ruining his expensive trousers. He reached for the hem of my coat, weeping openly. The visual was pathetic. A man who built his entire identity on superiority and deception was now groveling in motor oil, begging the woman he betrayed to shield him from the consequences of his own greed. I took a deliberate step backward, removing myself from his grasp. "I am not lifting the hold," I replied, my tone sharp and final. "The Adirondack estate belongs to my family. It will never belong to you or your creditors." Nathan looked up, his tear-streaked face twisting into a mask of pure horror. He realized the boundary was impenetrable. The loving, forgiving wife was dead. The auditor standing before him would not bend the rules to offer clemency. I turned on my heel, unlocked my car, and drove out of the subterranean garage, leaving him kneeling, alone, in the shadows. The digital recording resting in my pocket was the final nail in his coffin. He explicitly confessed to fraud, forgery, and illicit financial transactions on tape. Between Dominic's undercover maneuver and this audio file, Nathan's destruction was guaranteed. However, a wounded animal is not the only danger in the forest. While Nathan was collapsing under the weight of his own decisions, his partner in crime was executing a different survival strategy. Alyssa realized that Nathan was a sinking ship. She knew my corporate legal team was preparing a devastating lawsuit against her design firm for the fraudulent vendor invoices. She lacked the funds to fight a protracted legal battle, and she refused to go down with her ruined lover. Driven by sheer desperation, Alyssa decided the only way to save herself was to eliminate the primary witness. If she could discredit me and destroy my professional standing, my employer might drop the impending litigation. She needed a scapegoat. Sitting in her luxury apartment, she began compiling a digital dossier, preparing to launch a fierce, calculated strike directly into the heart of my career. The real estate developer was defeated, but the interior designer was about to unleash a corporate nightmare. The day I was accused of embezzling $3 million from my own company was the exact day I realized my husband was a dead man walking. I sat at the head of a polished mahogany table in the Human Resources boardroom, staring at the termination papers sliding across the reflective wood. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed a sterile, irritating tune. Across from me, the executive committee waited for a reaction. They expected a tear, or a desperate plea, or a crack in my professional armor. My pulse did not race. My palms remained dry. I simply folded my hands and offered a razor-thin smile. The chief executive officer of the conglomerate Victoria sat with her fingers steepled. She looked at me with a mixture of profound disappointment and severe corporate liability. Next to her, the head of Human Resources, David, tapped a thick, pristine manila folder containing an anonymous whistleblower complaint. The tip was meticulously drafted. It alleged that I utilized my top-level administrative clearance to deliberately authorize unverified vendor payouts. The document claimed I engineered the nested proxy structure, funneling corporate treasury funds into Apex Holdings and ultimately into Aura Design Group to finance my own illicit activities. Alyssa Thorne had launched her preemptive strike. Realizing that Nathan was a sinking ship and that her shell company was already flagged in my system, she attempted to sever the impending litigation by destroying the primary witness. She assumed that an anonymous email, dripping with financial jargon, would force my employer to terminate me immediately to contain the scandal. Without my income and stripped of my certified public accountant license, she believed I would be too impoverished and disgraced to pursue her in court. She severely underestimated the resilience of a woman who clawed her way to the executive floor. I did not inherit a trust fund. I built my career navigating the cutthroat ecosystem of New York finance, analyzing risk and identifying vulnerabilities in heavily guarded corporate structures. I spent 10 years earning my credentials, surviving grueling compliance audits, and outsmarting seasoned embezzlers. An amateur interior designer playing corporate espionage was a laughable opponent. "Roberta, we take these allegations with the utmost seriousness," Victoria stated, her voice echoing in the cavernous boardroom. "The digital footprint indicates your credentials approved the initial onboarding for these vendors. If you sign the separation agreement, we will handle the fallout internally without contacting federal authorities. If you fight this, we will hand the whistleblower file directly to the district attorney." They thought they were offering me clemency. I viewed it as an insult to my intelligence. I did not reach for the pen resting beside the termination contract. Instead, I reached into my leather briefcase and retrieved my sleek silver laptop. I opened the device and retrieved a standard connection cable from the center console of the conference table. "I strongly advise against making premature decisions based on fabricated intelligence," I said, projecting my voice with calm, unwavering authority. "Before you terminate your senior compliance director, I require 3 minutes of your time to demonstrate exactly how our corporate infrastructure was weaponized by an external threat." I plugged the cable into my machine. The large projector screen at the far end of the boardroom illuminated, casting a crisp blue glow over the executives. "First, we must address the motive behind this fraudulent tip," I continued, navigating to my encrypted audio files. "The vendor in question, Aura Design Group, is owned by a woman named Alyssa Thorne. She is currently engaging in an illicit affair with my husband, Nathan Pierce. When I uncovered their embezzlement operation earlier this week, I initiated the internal compliance freeze you see on your ledgers. In retaliation, they conspired to hide marital assets and ruin my professional standing. I clicked play on the audio recording I captured in my kitchen. The pristine acoustics of the boardroom amplified the voices of my husband and his mother, Patricia Pierce. The executives listened in stunned silence as Patricia urged Nathan to drain the remaining liquid assets and blindside me with divorce filings to protect Alyssa. The recording established the undeniable existence of a coordinated financial conspiracy targeting my livelihood. David frowned, adjusting his glasses. This is a disturbing domestic matter, Roberta. However, it does not invalidate the fact that the whistleblower email originated from a secure encrypted server, detailing your specific approval codes. I offered a chilling, knowing smirk. A secure encrypted server is merely a locked door, David. I countered my tone, sharpening into a lethal edge. And every door has a hinge. When the anonymous tip arrived in your inbox yesterday, I immediately contacted Jonathan, our Chief Information Security Officer. I tasked his cybersecurity division with tracing the origin of the transmission. The sender utilized a virtual private network to mask their location, routing the signal through 3 overseas servers to simulate anonymity. I brought up a complex network diagnostic map on the projector screen. Red lines zigzagged across a digital globe, illustrating the routing path of the deceptive email. Unfortunately for the sender, our corporate firewall is equipped with military-grade packet-sniffing software. I explained, walking the executives through the digital forensics. Jonathan and his team bypassed the encryption layer and isolated the genuine geographic origin of the data packet. They traced the signal directly back to the physical media access control address of the specific router that transmitted the email. I clicked the final slide. A high-definition satellite map of the Upper East Side appeared on the screen, zooming in on a specific luxury high-rise building. The address was stamped in bold white lettering. This is the exact location of the router, I announced, locking eyes with Victoria. It belongs to the luxury apartment leased by Alyssa Thorne. The mistress of my husband fabricated a whistleblower complaint to frame a corporate executive for her own embezzlement scheme. She committed tortious interference, defamation, and federal wire fraud using an interstate internet connection. The silence in the boardroom was profound. The executives stared at the screen, processing the sheer audacity of the crime. The narrative shifted instantly. I was no longer the accused embezzler. I was the vigilant executive who thwarted a sophisticated external attack on their treasury, while simultaneously identifying the perpetrator. Victoria leaned forward, her posture shifting from accusatory to fiercely protective of her corporate empire. She picked up the separation agreement she had offered me and tore it perfectly in half, dropping the shreds into the wastebasket beside her chair. "Get Jonathan from IT and our general counsel in here right now," Victoria commanded, directing her order at David. "We are not handling this internally. I want a civil complaint drafted before lunch. We are suing Aura Design Group and Alyssa Thorne for corporate fraud, seeking ruinous punitive damages. We will freeze every asset she possesses and forward this entire forensic file to the federal prosecutor." The corporate machinery turned its immense, devastating weaponry away from me and locked its sights directly onto the woman who tried to ruin my life. Across the city, in her pristine luxury apartment, Alyssa Thorne believed she had secured her victory. She likely sat on her velvet sofa, sipping an expensive latte, waiting for the news of my disgraceful termination. She assumed the shield of internet anonymity would protect her from the consequences of her venomous actions. At exactly 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a sharp knock resonated against her designer door. She opened it expecting a package delivery or a dry cleaning drop-off. Instead, she found a grim-faced process server standing in the hallway, holding a thick, dense stack of legal documents bound by a heavy blue clip. "You have been served," the man stated flatly. pressing the formidable envelope into her hands before turning and walking away. Alyssa retreated into her apartment, tearing open the seal. She scanned the front page of the civil complaint. The plaintiff listed was my multi-billion-dollar tech conglomerate. The defendants listed were Aura Design Group and Alyssa Thorne. The allegations included wire fraud, intentional sabotage, and a demand for restitution that vastly exceeded any amount of money she had ever seen in her life. The final page contained a notice that the digital forensics were being surrendered to the authorities for criminal prosecution. The paperwork slipped from her manicured fingers, scattering across the imported hardwood floor. The reality of her impending doom crashed over her. She was facing certain bankruptcy and the terrifying prospect of a federal prison sentence. She realized that her wealthy real estate developer lover was a destitute pariah, drowning in shadow debt and unable to offer a single dollar for her legal defense. The primal instinct for self-preservation eclipsed her manufactured romance. Nathan Pierce was deadweight, and dragging him into the abyss was the only bargaining chip she had left. She needed to strike a deal, and she knew exactly who held the power to grant her clemency. The crushing weight of a multi-million-dollar corporate lawsuit operates like a fast-acting neurotoxin. It seeps into the nervous system, paralyzing the victim with the terrifying certainty of impending ruin. Sitting in her leased luxury apartment, Alyssa Thorne experienced this toxic paralysis firsthand. The interior designer had spent her adult life manipulating wealthy men, relying on her youth and curated charm to secure her financial stability. But curated charm holds zero currency in a federal courtroom. Faced with the prospect of restitution payments that would garnish her wages for the next 50 years, Alyssa did the only logical thing a parasite could do when its host begins to die. She detached herself. My secure smartphone illuminated on the mahogany desk in my home office later that evening. An incoming text message displayed an unknown number, but the frantic syntax revealed the sender instantly. Alyssa requested an urgent, discreet meeting. She promised to provide actionable intelligence regarding my husband in exchange for clemency from my tech conglomerate. I showed the message to my father. Dominic poured a measure of scotch into a crystal tumbler, his eyes scanning the digital plea. A criminal syndicate relies entirely on mutual survival, my father noted, taking a slow sip. When you introduce the threat of incarceration, the weakest link will always shatter. Let her flip. Extract the data, but ensure the architect of your misery witnesses the defection. I agreed. I replied to the mistress setting the rendezvous for 10 o'clock the following morning at a bustling independent coffee roaster in Midtown. The location was heavily populated, ensuring physical safety while providing an audience for the impending spectacle. Then, utilizing an untraceable burner application Dominic had installed on my device, I sent a concise, anonymous text to Nathan. I informed my estranged husband that his partner in crime was currently brokering an immunity deal with his wife, detailing the exact time and address of the meeting. The morning air carried a crisp, biting chill as I walked into the bustling cafe. The scent of roasted espresso beans and baked pastries offered a deceptive warmth. I wore a tailored charcoal blazer over a crisp white blouse, presenting the impenetrable armor of a corporate executive. I purchased a black coffee and took a seat at a small corner table facing the entrance. 10 minutes later, Alyssa pushed through the heavy glass doors. The transformation was striking. The radiant, confident woman who clung to Nathan at the real estate gala had vanished. Her designer clothing looked disheveled, as if she had slept in them. She wore oversized sunglasses to hide the swollen dark circles under her eyes, holding a cheap canvas tote bag tightly against her chest. She scanned the crowded room, her gaze darting with the erratic paranoia of a hunted fugitive. When she spotted me, she hesitated. Her shoulders slumped in defeat before she navigated the maze of tables and slid into the chair opposite mine. She did not order a drink. She removed her sunglasses, revealing bloodshot eyes rimmed with smeared mascara. "Thank you for agreeing to see me, Roberta," she began, her voice trembling. Her hands shook as she placed them on the wooden table. I did not realize how far Nathan was willing to go. He lied to me. He told me the vendor contracts were legitimate and that you were planning to steal his company. I never wanted to be involved in a felony. I observed her with the clinical detachment of a scientist examining a defective specimen. I felt no anger toward her in that moment. Anger requires an emotional investment, and my emotional investment in this entire ecosystem had evaporated at the airport terminal. "Let us skip the rehearsed victim narrative, Alyssa," I replied, my tone smooth and frigid. "You did not invite me here to discuss your moral epiphanies. You invited me here because you received a summons from my legal department and you are terrified of wearing a prison uniform. What exactly are you offering to mitigate your liability?" She swallowed hard, intimidated by the surgical precision of my response. She unzipped her canvas tote bag and retrieved a small silver thumb drive. She kept her fingers clamped over the metal casing, reluctant to surrender her only bargaining chip. "This drive contains everything," she whispered, leaning across the table. "It holds the routing numbers for the offshore accounts Nathan set up in the Cayman Islands. It contains the encrypted emails where he instructed me to generate the fake invoices. It also holds a digital scan of the original Adirondack deed before he altered it, proving he orchestrated the forgery." She paused, taking a ragged breath. "I will hand this over to you," Alyssa offered, her voice cracking. "I will testify against him in any civil or criminal proceeding. I will stand in front of a judge and confess to my role in the forgery conspiracy. I will give you the weapon to lock him away forever. But in exchange, you have to make your employer drop the lawsuit against my design firm. You have to promise I will not to jail for the corporate theft." I stared at the silver drive resting beneath her trembling fingertips. The intelligence contained on that device was the final cornerstone required to build an inescapable federal cage around my husband. It documented the exact flow of illicit capital closing the evidentiary loop Dominic and I had been constructing for weeks. I reached across the table and smoothly pulled the drive from her grasp. I dropped the metallic device into my blazer pocket without breaking eye contact. "If the digital forensics on this drive corroborate your claims," I stated, keeping my voice modulated and transactional, "I will advise my general counsel to suspend the civil litigation against your enterprise. You will cooperate fully with the federal prosecutors when they dismantle his remaining portfolio." Tears spilled over her lower lashes, carving tracks through her ruined makeup. The overwhelming relief of avoiding total financial annihilation caused her to drop her guard entirely. She reached out, attempting to place her hand over mine in a gesture of shared trauma. I pulled my hand back, resting it firmly on my lap. "I am so sorry, Roberta," she wept, wiping her face with the back of her wrist. "I never wanted to hurt you. I feel terrible about everything that happened." I looked at her, offering a smile devoid of any warmth. "You are not sorry you slept with my husband," I corrected my words, cutting through the ambient noise of the cafe like a scalpel. "You are just sorry I was smarter than you." Alyssa flinched, recoiling as if she had been physically struck. Before she could formulate a response, the heavy glass doors of the coffee shop swung open with forceful momentum. Nathan Pierce marched into the establishment. His appearance mirrored the desperation of his mistress. His jaw was covered in a rough, dark stubble. His eyes were wide and frantic, scanning the patrons until his gaze locked onto our corner table. The anonymous tip had served its purpose perfectly. He stormed across the cafe, ignoring the startled glances of the morning commuters. He reached our table and slammed both of his hands down onto the wooden surface, rattling my coffee cup. "What are you doing?" he hissed, glaring down at Alyssa with a toxic, furious intensity. "What did you give her?" Alyssa recoiled, pressing her back against the chair. The sight of the man she had conspired with now triggered sheer terror. She looked at me, then back to him. Her betrayal laid bare in the bustling public venue. "I gave her the offshore ledgers, Nathan," she cried out, her voice rising in panic. "I gave her the emails. I had to do it. She was going to bankrupt me. She was going to send me to a penitentiary. You told me the shadow loan would fix everything. But the lenders are hunting you. You are finished, and I am not going down with you." Nathan staggered backward, as if the words carried a physical, kinetic impact. The realization that his most loyal accomplice had traded his freedom for her own survival fractured the last remaining pillar of his sanity. The pristine, arrogant facade he had maintained for years crumbled into dust right there among the espresso machines and the morning pastries. "You treacherous parasite!" Nathan roared, abandoning any semblance of public decorum. "I risked everything to fund your lifestyle. I forged legal documents to keep you in luxury. You are nothing without my capital. I am nothing because of your capital." Alyssa screamed back, standing up and pointing a shaking finger at his chest. "You used my name on a dummy corporation. You made me the target of a federal investigation. Stay away from me. I am testifying against you." The argument escalated into a vicious, explosive spectacle. Patrons lowered their laptops and removed their headphones, watching the immolation of a criminal partnership. Nathan lunged forward, grabbing Alyssa by the wrist, demanding she retract her statements. The barista behind the counter grabbed the telephone, loudly threatening to call the authorities if they did not vacate the premises immediately. I did not intervene. I remained seated, watching the syndicate tear itself apart from the inside out. The poison of their own greed had finally consumed them. I picked up my coffee cup, took a final, slow sip, and stood up from the table. I adjusted the lapels of my blazer, slipping past the warring traders without a single backward glance. I walked out of the glass doors, stepping into the bright, bustling energy of the Manhattan streets. The silver drive rested heavy and cold in my pocket. The alliance was severed. Nathan was now entirely isolated, stripped of his financial resources, his legal defenses, and his co-conspirators. He had nowhere left to run, and no one left to manipulate. The stage was perfectly set for the final arena. He was walking blind and broken, straight into a sworn deposition where the truth would finally drag him into the light. The conference room on the 42nd floor of my legal counsel's Manhattan firm offered a breathtaking panoramic view of Central Park. The autumn canopy below resembled a mosaic of copper and gold stretching toward the horizon. I sat at the expansive glass table, ignoring the scenic backdrop, focusing entirely on the stenography machine resting near the center of the room. A licensed court reporter adjusted her equipment, preparing to transcribe the impending execution. My lead attorney, a formidable litigator named Winston, sat to my right. He arranged his pristine legal pads with surgical precision. Opposite us sat my estranged husband. Nathan wore a bespoke charcoal suit, his posture radiating a practiced, unearned confidence. He had hired a high-priced defense attorney who specialized in shielding wealthy executives from asset division. His counsel was notorious for ruthless tactics, but he was operating under a fatal disadvantage. He believed his client. He assumed he was defending a charming developer against a bitter, vindictive spouse. He had no idea he was representing an architect of corporate fraud. The court reporter administered the oath. Nathan raised his right hand and swore to tell the truth under penalty of perjury. He lowered his hand, adjusting his silk tie with a crisp, arrogant motion. He looked across the table at me, offering a condescending smile. He genuinely believed he held the superior hand. He thought Alyssa was holding the line, protecting their secrets. He thought the shadow loan was secure, and his liquidity problem was solved. Winston began the deposition with foundational inquiries. He established Nathan's identity, his business holdings, and our marital timeline. The rhythm of the interrogation was deceptively mild. Winston allowed the prey to feel comfortable asking open-ended questions that invited lengthy, self-serving narratives. When Winston broached the subject of marital fidelity, Nathan deployed his rehearsed fiction. He leaned back in his leather chair, adopting the persona of a weary, misunderstood partner. He explicitly denied engaging in an illicit relationship with his interior designer. He claimed his meetings with his mistress were strictly professional, necessary for staging his luxury real estate developments. He painted me as an unstable workaholic whose demanding role as a compliance director had fractured my grip on reality. He suggested my grueling corporate hours bred unfounded jealousy, twisting innocent business dinners into imaginary betrayals. I sat perfectly still. I did not glare, I did not interrupt. I listened as the stenographer captured every fabricated syllable, transforming his arrogance into a permanent legal record. Winston shifted the focus toward our finances. He inquired about the vendor disbursements routed from my tech conglomerate to the proxy shell company. Nathan did not flinch. He confidently denied any involvement in corporate embezzlement. He testified that those payouts were legitimate compensation for consulting services rendered to my employer. He swore under oath that he never utilized those funds to cover personal margin debts or fund his private enterprise. The trap widened. Winston presented a photocopy of the power of attorney document pertaining to my ancestral Adirondack estate. He asked Nathan if he recognized the paperwork. Nathan glanced at his expensive defense attorney, then looked back at Winston. He stated he recognized the document. He testified that I had willingly signed the transfer of authority, granting him permission to leverage the cabin for a commercial bridge loan. He swore the signature was authentic, executed in his physical presence. For a full hour, Winston permitted the deception to flow uninterrupted. Nathan spun a dense, intricate web of lies, burying himself under multiple counts of felony perjury. His attorney looked smug, taking sparse notes, assuming they were dominating the proceeding and building an impenetrable defense. Then the tactical retreat ended. The offensive strike commenced. Winston paused, capping his fountain pen with a sharp metallic click. He reached beneath the table and retrieved a sleek black evidence box. He opened the lid, revealing a small silver thumb drive, a printed audio transcript, and a magnified photograph of a notary seal. "Let the record reflect that I am introducing Exhibit A," Winston announced, his tone dropping its mild facade, turning sharp and unforgiving. "This is a digital archive surrendered to my client yesterday morning by an individual named Alyssa Thorne." The smug confidence drained from Nathan's face, replaced by a sudden, chilling realization. His posture stiffened. His attorney frowned, leaning forward, sensing an abrupt shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room. "This drive contains thousands of internal emails," Winston continued, sliding the device across the glass. "It details a coordinated conspiracy to generate fraudulent vendor invoices. Furthermore, it contains the routing numbers for offshore accounts located in the Cayman Islands, where embezzled funds from my client's employer were systematically laundered." Nathan swallowed hard, his vocal cords paralyzed. "Next, I introduce Exhibit B," Winston said, producing the printed transcript. "This is a certified transcription of an audio recording captured 2 days ago in a subterranean parking garage." Winston did not ask for permission. He read the transcript aloud for the court reporter, ensuring every word entered the official record. He recited Nathan's desperate, unhinged pleas. He read the exact sentences where my husband admitted to forging my signature on the Adirondack deed to secure an illegal loan from a shadow private equity firm. The words echoed in the pristine conference room, a damning testament to his cowardice and criminality. "Finally, Exhibit C," Winston concluded, placing the magnified photograph of the notary seal on the table. "This is the collateral document currently held by Vanguard Capital. If you look closely at the center of the embossed seal, you will see a microscopic X scratched into the paper. My client placed that mark there before the document was ever submitted to the predatory lenders, rendering it legally void. You did not just forge her signature, you defrauded a shadow syndicate. The silence that engulfed the deposition room was heavy and suffocating. Nathan's high-priced defense attorney stared at the evidence laid out before him. A seasoned legal professional understands the strict boundaries of ethical representation. An attorney cannot knowingly facilitate perjury or continue to represent a client actively utilizing their services to commit a crime. The lawyer realized his client had just lied under oath about affairs, embezzlement, and forgery for 60 consecutive minutes, creating a catastrophic federal liability. The attorney stood up. His face was pale, his expression a mixture of professional fury and desperate self-preservation. He did not confer with his client. He looked directly at the court reporter. "Madam Court Reporter, we are going off the record," the attorney commanded, his voice trembling with barely suppressed anger. "I am suspending this deposition immediately. Furthermore, let the record reflect that I am withdrawing as legal counsel for the defendant, effective right now, citing irreconcilable ethical conflicts." Nathan looked up at his lawyer, his eyes wide with terror. "You cannot leave me here," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You work for me." "I work for my bar license," the attorney snapped, snapping his briefcase shut with erratic speed. "And you just tried to immolate it. You are on your own." The lawyer turned on his heel and walked rapidly out of the conference room, leaving the door slightly ajar. Nathan sat, utterly isolated, at the expansive glass table. The tailored charcoal suit he wore now looked like a straitjacket. He was sweating profusely, beads of moisture gathering on his forehead and slipping down his collar. He looked at me silently, begging for a lifeline, searching for the forgiving partner he had exploited for years. I offered him nothing. I sat with my hands folded, observing the ruins of his empire. He was stripped of his mistress, stripped of his capital, and now stripped of his legal defense. He was a man drowning in an ocean of his own creation, realizing the shore was 1,000 miles away. He had constructed an elaborate fantasy where he reigned supreme, and I had systematically dismantled it using nothing but patience and forensic accounting. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a desperate apology, perhaps to plead for a final ounce of mercy. He never got the chance. Heavy, determined footsteps echoed in the corridor outside the conference room. The heavy double doors of the law firm swung wide open, pushed by a coordinated unseen force. A team of individuals wearing dark suits and stern expressions stepped into the room, their gold badges gleaming under the recessed lighting. The final phase of the operation had officially commenced. The heavy double doors of the law firm conference room swung open, pushed backward by a synchronized, unseen force. 4 individuals stepped into the expansive space, shattering the tense silence that had settled over the mahogany table. They wore tailored dark suits, yet they did not carry leather briefcases or legal pads. They carried an aura of indisputable federal authority. Gold shields clipped to their belts caught the recessed overhead lighting, flashing a stark warning signal that the civil divorce dispute had just escalated into a criminal takedown. Dominic had not been idle while I systematically cornered my husband in the corporate and civil arenas. Utilizing his extensive network, my father had mobilized his former colleagues at the Federal Bureau of Investigation, specifically deploying the White-Collar Crime Division. When Nathan executed those electronic transfers to siphon corporate treasury funds into a proxy shell company, he routed the capital across state lines, triggering federal oversight. When he leveraged the forged Adirondack deed to secure a bridge loan from Vanguard Capital, he engaged in interstate financial deception. Those specific, calculated actions elevated his local misdeeds into strict federal jurisdiction. He had built his own cage. The agents were simply arriving to lock the door. The lead investigator, A tall woman with steel gray hair and an uncompromising gaze bypassed my attorney and walked directly toward my husband. She moved with a terrifying, practiced efficiency. "Nathan Pierce," she announced, her voice echoing off the panoramic glass windows overlooking Central Park. "You are under arrest for interstate wire fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit corporate embezzlement." The metallic rattle of handcuffs pierced the pristine acoustics of the room. The agent grabbed his wrists, pulling them firmly behind his back, securing the steel cuffs with a sharp, echoing click. As she recited his Miranda rights, detailing his right to remain silent and his right to an attorney, Nathan looked like a terrified, cornered child. His expensive, uninformed defense lawyer stood hovering just outside the doorway in the corridor. The attorney watched the catastrophe unfold for 3 seconds before turning his back and walking rapidly toward the elevators, formally washing his hands of a toxic client. Stripped of his legal shield, bereft of his mistress and drained of his wealth, Nathan broke. The polished, luxury real estate developer crumbled under the weight of his own hubris. He strained against the agent's firm grip, twisting his neck frantically to look at me. The bespoke charcoal suit he wore bunched awkwardly around his bound arms, destroying his carefully curated aesthetic of superiority. "Roberta, please," he begged, his voice cracking into a high, desperate pitch. "Do not let them do this to me. We were married for 5 years. We built a life together. You know I am a good man deep down. You cannot throw me in a cage. I will give you everything. I will sign whatever asset division papers you want. I will walk away with nothing. Please, just call them off. Look at me." I stood up from the glass table, smoothing the creases of my tailored skirt. I walked around the edge of the mahogany surface until I stood mere inches from him. I looked into his panic-stricken eyes, recalling the exact moment at the airport terminal when he chose to embrace another woman and destroy our vows. I remembered the cold, dismissive text message he sent from the baggage claim, lying about a delayed flight while he planned his domestic ambush. I offered him no warmth, no pity, and no salvation. "You made your choice at JFK," I replied, my tone an icy, unyielding calm that mirrored the exact emotional detachment he had shown me. "You bet our entire future on a lie, assuming I was too blind to notice the deficit. I merely audited the transaction and balanced the ledger. Enjoy your new accommodations." The lead agent nodded, gripping his bicep and steering him toward the exit. Nathan continued to plead, his voice echoing down the marble hallway until the heavy conference doors clicked shut, severing his connection to my life forever. While my husband was being escorted into a secure freight elevator in Manhattan, a simultaneous operation was unfolding 12 miles away at LaGuardia Airport. Patricia Pierce, having received a frantic, coded text from her son hours earlier, warning her of the sudden asset freeze, had packed a single designer carry-on bag. She booked a first-class ticket to a non-extradition jurisdiction, intending to flee the country and live comfortably off the hidden funds she had helped launder. She stood at the departure gate, clutching her embossed passport, believing her generational wealth and elite social status made her untouchable. She wore a pristine Chanel suit and oversized sunglasses, tapping her manicured fingers against her luggage handle, waiting for the boarding announcement. She was entirely wrong about her invulnerability. Before she could hand her first-class boarding pass to the airline attendant, 2 United States Marshals flanked her. They did not care about her country club memberships or her haughty demeanor. They stepped into her personal space, blocking her path to the jet bridge. They informed her she was being detained as a co-conspirator for knowingly shielding illicit funds and facilitating interstate fraud. The matriarch, who had funded her son's infidelity, encouraged his financial crimes, and mocked my career, was escorted through the bustling terminal in handcuffs. Her high society facade shattered under the glare of hundreds of curious onlookers, reducing her to a common fugitive. The entire corrupt support network collapsed in a single, flawlessly coordinated afternoon. Standing in the quiet conference room, I walked toward the panoramic window, looking out over the sprawling canopy of Central Park. My lead attorney, Winston, quietly packed his legal pads into his briefcase, offering a respectful nod before leaving me alone with my thoughts. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A brief text message from Dominic confirmed that Patricia had been apprehended at the gate and Vanguard Capital had formally dissolved the fraudulent loan paperwork. The adrenaline that had fueled my actions for weeks began to recede, leaving behind a profound, crystalline clarity. The Shadow Syndicate threat, which had loomed over my physical safety, was fully neutralized. Dominic's undercover sting had safely absorbed the fraudulent debt, ensuring no actual predatory lenders would ever knock on my door. The battlefield was swept clean. Every enemy who had conspired to steal my future was currently sitting in the back of a federal transport vehicle, facing decades of incarceration. The storm had passed. The intricate web of lies, forgery, and betrayal had been meticulously untangled and eradicated. I took a deep, steadying breath, watching the autumn leaves drift over the city skyline. I was alone, but I was unburdened, ready to face the final chapter of this ordeal on my own terms. 6 months of silence can be louder than any spoken argument. The federal justice machinery operates with the sluggish inevitability of a glacier crushing everything caught beneath its unrelenting weight. It does not care about your bespoke suits or your exclusive zip code. It only cares about the paper trail. Nathan had spent his entire adulthood slipping through the cracks of accountability, utilizing his charm and his mother's checkbook to erase minor indiscretions. A crashed sports car in college vanished with a quiet donation to a local precinct. A breached real estate contract disappeared under a wave of expensive litigation. He expected the federal government to operate on the same transactional wavelength. He was catastrophically mistaken. The climax of his downfall did not feature a theatrical courtroom battle. The evidentiary threshold had been crossed long before a jury could be impaneled. The digital forensics on the silver thumb drive, the audio confession from the parking garage, and the microscopic scratch on the forged deed formed an impenetrable wall of guilt. Facing this insurmountable reality, his newly assigned public defender attempted one final, desperate maneuver. The attorney submitted a motion for a global settlement, offering to expedite the asset forfeiture process if I agreed to advocate for a reduced sentence. I sat in the austere office of the federal prosecutor, reviewing the drafted proposal. I declined the offer, without a second thought. I did not require his cooperation to seize the assets, because the financial documentation spoke for itself. Denied his final manipulative lever, Nathan faced the terrifying prospect of a protracted trial he could not afford. Cornered and defenseless, he surrendered. He signed a plea agreement accepting 8 years in a medium-security federal penitentiary, paired with a mandate for thorough financial restitution. While my former husband resigned himself to a concrete cell, his accomplice believed she had navigated her way to safety. Alyssa Thorne assumed her cooperation granted her a clean slate. She secured immunity from criminal prosecution by acting as the primary witness against her former lover. She thought she could simply rebrand her aesthetic and fade into another affluent social circle. She failed to comprehend the dual nature of the American legal system. Alyssa built her entire identity on perceived proximity to wealth, utilizing carefully curated social media profiles to attract high-net-worth clients. While the Department of Justice spared her from a criminal conviction, my tech conglomerate unleashed a civil litigation nightmare. Our corporate attorneys executed a ruthless judgment to recover the stolen treasury funds. I watched the proceedings from the executive boardroom as her limited liability company was systematically dismantled. The liquidation was exhaustive. Court-appointed receivers seized her professional drafting tables, her imported fabric swatches, and her expensive computer hardware. Furthermore, the design industry is a notoriously insular community. My compliance network ensured every prestigious architectural firm in New York received a detailed summary of her fraudulent billing practices. She attempted to secure a junior position at a boutique agency in Soho, but the background check flagged her involvement in the proxy shell company. She was permanently blacklisted. The designer who once mocked my corporate wardrobe found her portfolios shredded and her reputation reduced to ash. The matriarch presented a different breed of resistance. Patricia Pierce had spent 6 decades shielded by inherited prestige. Confined to her Manhattan residence under strict house arrest, she wore a bulky GPS ankle monitor beneath her tailored silk trousers. The chafing plastic served as a constant, humiliating reminder of her lost autonomy. Defiant to the bitter end, she attempted a covert wire transfer, routing the last of her liquid capital into a blind trust to protect her prized Hamptons estate from government seizure. She underestimated the surveillance apparatus surrounding her finances. Monitoring the metadata of her restricted accounts, Dominic flagged the anomalous offshore ping within minutes. The federal judge presiding over her conspiracy charges viewed the maneuver as a blatant violation of her bail conditions. The swift judicial retaliation was breathtaking. The court mandated the immediate public auction of her sprawling coastal property to cover her crippling legal fees and court-ordered penalties. The woman who once sneered at my ancestral Adirondack cabin was forced to watch real estate brokers dismantle her sanctuary to pay for her hubris. The sentencing hearing arrived on a brisk Tuesday morning. I sat in the polished wooden gallery of the federal courthouse with Dominic at my side. The room smelled of lemon polish and stale tension. There was no theatrical cross-examination. There were no surprise witnesses bursting through the heavy oak doors. The spectacle had already been dismantled in the deposition room 6 months prior. Today was merely the formal execution of consequences. Nathan was led into the courtroom wearing a standard khaki uniform. His custom tailoring was a distant memory, replaced by institutional fabric that hung loosely on his shrinking frame. His shoulders sagged under the invisible weight of his ruined legacy. He did not turn to look at the gallery. He kept his eyes fixed firmly on the brass seal of the United States mounted behind the bench. The presiding magistrate, a stern individual with a reputation for piercing financial deceits, adjusted his reading glasses. He read the sentencing parameters into the official record. The words echoed through the silent chamber, finalizing the 8 years of federal incarceration. Restitution would be enforced through the permanent forfeiture of his remaining portfolios. Before the session concluded, the defense attorney stood up, attempting a minor procedural delay regarding the transfer of the physical properties. He argued that Nathan should retain partial equity in the primary residence due to market appreciation during the marriage. The judge swatted the motion down with a wave of his hand. He addressed the civil petitions attached to the criminal proceedings. The decree was swift and unequivocal. I was officially granted sole and unchallengeable ownership of all contested properties. The deed to the Manhattan penthouse and the title to the 50-acre Adirondack estate were transferred entirely into my name. The legal hold was lifted, transforming the properties into impenetrable fortresses belonging exclusively to me. I listened to the wooden gavel strike the sounding block. The sharp crack resonated in my chest, echoing the finality of the ruling. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel a sudden rush of euphoric victory. I felt the profound, quiet satisfaction of a perfectly balanced ledger. Every debt he incurred had been collected. Every lie he told had been exposed and quantified. The monumental boulders of conflict that had threatened to crush my career and my future were reduced to fine dust, scattered by the unrelenting machinery of justice. Dominic placed a warm, calloused hand over mine. He offered a brief, approving nod, acknowledging the culmination of our meticulous strategy. We stood up from the gallery bench as the marshals escorted my former husband toward the holding cells. We turned our backs on the courtroom, navigating the echoing marble corridors of the federal building. We pushed through the heavy revolving doors, stepping out into the bright, unfiltered New York sun. The chaotic energy of the city surged around us, with taxis honking and pedestrians moving with urgent purpose. I took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air, letting the warmth wash over my face. The suffocating shadow of the betrayal lifted permanently, evaporating into the clear blue sky. The executive suite on the 58th floor smelled of polished cedar and quiet authority. 365 days had passed since the federal gavel fell, shattering my former life. I stood at the head of the boardroom table, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. My reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass revealed a woman who had weathered a storm and emerged as the storm itself. The board of directors did not merely retain my services after the vendor fraud scandal. They recognized the surgical precision required to dismantle an internal threat without bleeding corporate capital. I was promoted to chief financial officer within 3 months of the trial. I now controlled the very treasury my former husband tried to plunder. I commanded a division of 200 analysts, auditors, and attorneys. My signature dictated the flow of billions. My promotion did not merely come with a corner office and a compensation package that dwarfed Nathan's former net worth. It came with the profound realization that my professional vigilance had saved the conglomerate from a catastrophic public scandal. The crisp autumn wind swept through the concrete canyons of the financial district later that afternoon. I stood near the edge of my wraparound terrace, looking down at the crawling yellow taxis 50 stories below. The penthouse belonged solely to me now, stripped of every aesthetic choice my former husband had ever made. The imported Italian leather sofas he favored were gone. The abstract art he purchased to impress his shallow social circle had been auctioned off to fund a local domestic violence shelter. I redesigned the space to reflect my own sensibilities, utilizing clean lines, structural minimalism, and an abundance of natural light. The ancestral Adirondack estate, once a pawn in Nathan's desperate game of shadow finance, now stood as a pristine retreat. I spent the summer weekends there with Dominic, repairing the boathouse and hiking the scenic trails of the Northeast forests. The invisible legal hold was lifted, and the deed rested securely in a reinforced safety deposit box, bearing only my name. Every asset he attempted to leverage was fortified. To complete the terrace renovation, I required specific outdoor fixtures. My interior decorator suggested an upscale boutique in Brooklyn, but I opted for a highly pragmatic warehouse outlet in Queens to source a specific teakwood patio set. That mundane Saturday errand provided the final act of poetic justice an author could never script. I navigated the brightly lit aisles of the discount furniture retailer, holding a printed invoice. The air smelled of industrial cardboard and cheap adhesive. I approached the checkout counter. The sales associate standing behind the register wore a polyester uniform vest over a faded cotton shirt. Her blonde hair, once meticulously styled in high society salons, was pulled back into a hasty, uneven ponytail. It was Alyssa Thorne, the interior designer who once scoffed at my wardrobe and envisioned herself reigning over my Manhattan real estate, was now operating a barcode scanner for minimum wage. Her boutique firm had been liquidated, her reputation reduced to ashes. The design industry exiled her, leaving her to navigate the harsh economic reality of retail survival. The corporate lawsuit initiated by my general counsel had seized her drafting tables, her imported fabric swatches, and her remaining pride. She looked up to recite the standard customer greeting. Her voice died in her throat. Her eyes widened, locking onto my face. The scanner slipped from her hand, clattering against the laminate countertop. I did not smile. I did not sneer. I simply placed my credit card on the counter next to the invoice for the teakwood patio set. "Good afternoon, Alyssa," I said, my tone perfectly pleasant and entirely devoid of emotion. "I need to arrange delivery for Tuesday." Her hands shook so profoundly she could barely retrieve the scanner. She scanned the paper invoice, her breathing shallow and ragged. She did not dare make eye contact again. The ultimate punishment for a narcissist is not anger, it is indifference. She realized I did not view her as a rival or a threat. She was merely a retail employee facilitating my weekend errands. She handed me the receipt, her fingers trembling against the thermal paper. I took it, offering a polite nod, and walked out the automatic sliding doors, leaving her trapped in her own self-inflicted purgatory. The memory of that encounter faded as the heavy sliding glass door of the penthouse opened behind me. Dominic stepped onto the terrace, carrying 2 crystal goblets and a bottle of vintage Barolo. My father wore a comfortable cashmere sweater. His posture relaxed, the rigid tension of his bureau days finally easing from his shoulders. He poured the dark crimson wine, handing me a glass. The city lights began to flicker on across the skyline, illuminating the sprawling metropolis we called home. We stood in a comfortable, companionable silence. My smartphone buzzed on the wrought iron table beside me. I glanced at the glowing screen. It was an automated notification from the Federal Bureau of Prisons Victim Notification System. I had registered my contact information during the sentencing phase to monitor any changes in inmate status. I tapped the screen, opening the secure email. The notification detailed a disciplinary transfer. Inmate Nathan Pierce had attempted to execute a crude commissary scam against a fellow prisoner. His innate arrogance, the very trait that destroyed our marriage, blinded him to the brutal hierarchy of the federal penitentiary. The target of his hustle was a prominent figure within an organized syndicate. The resulting altercation necessitated my former husband's immediate transfer to a higher security facility with significantly restricted privileges. He would spend 23 hours a day confined to a concrete cell, stripped of the meager social interactions he previously enjoyed. I read the text twice, processing the information. A year ago, a message containing Nathan's name would have triggered a spike of adrenaline, or a wave of profound betrayal. Today it registered as nothing more than a mundane administrative update. He was a closed account, a balanced ledger, a ghost haunting a cage of his own design. I pressed the delete icon. The email vanished into the digital trash bin, instantly and permanently erased from my device. I locked the screen and placed the phone face down on the table, dismissing his existence without a single lingering thought. I looked down at my left hand resting against the crystal stem of the wineglass. The platinum band that once anchored me to a parasite was long gone. In its place, the skin was smooth, unblemished, and entirely unburdened. For 5 years I wore a symbol of a fraudulent partnership, believing I was building a foundation for a shared future. I learned the hard way that a foundation built on deceit will always collapse. But I also learned that the person who clears the rubble controls the new architecture. Dominic raised his glass, the deep red wine catching the ambient light of the city. He looked at me, his expression radiating a quiet, fierce pride. He had raised a daughter who could navigate the darkest corridors of betrayal and emerge with her moral compass intact. "To the future, sweetheart," my father said, his voice steady and resonant. "To a clean ledger and an unwritten page." I raised my glass, meeting his toast. "To the future," I echoed. I took a slow sip of the Barolo, savoring the rich, complex flavor. The cold autumn wind swirled around the terrace, but I felt remarkably warm. The sprawling city of New York stretched out before me, a vast landscape of opportunity and unyielding momentum. I owned the sanctuary I stood upon. I had protected my legacy and annihilated the predators who sought to steal my peace. The game of corporate and domestic warfare requires an unforgiving discipline. The enemy always relies on your emotional vulnerability, expecting tears, panic, and irrational decisions. They anticipate a shattered victim. They never anticipate a forensic auditor armed with federal resources and an unbreakable will. The lesson was etched into my soul. True strength does not reside in loud proclamations or dramatic displays of vengeance. True strength is the silent, calculated execution of justice. It is the ability to walk through the fire and forge yourself into a weapon they can never defeat. The shadow of the betrayal was gone, leaving behind a resonant, morally satisfying silence. I looked out over the glowing skyline, ready to conquer whatever challenge dared to cross my desk next. The saga of Roberta Rossi and Nathan Pierce is on its surface a masterclass in corporate espionage and marital vengeance. It is a thrilling, cinematic dismantling of a fraudulent husband by a brilliantly calculating wife. Yet when the dust settles and the federal indictments are handed down, the true foundation of this narrative reveals itself. It is not merely a story about infidelity or financial ruin. At its core, this is a profound commentary on the generational consequences of parenting. It is a stark examination of family responsibility, the divergent paths of moral guidance, and the ultimate harvest we reap from the seeds we plant in the next generation. Looking at the contrasting figures of Dominic Rossi and Patricia Pierce, we see two vastly different approaches to American parenting within a traditional family structure. Dominic, a retired FBI forensic accountant, did not just teach his daughter how to balance a ledger, he taught her how to balance her moral compass. He instilled in Roberta the virtues of absolute honesty, rigorous fairness, and a deep, unshakable emotional awareness. By teaching her to look at numbers, he taught her to look at reality unflinchingly and without the comfort of self-delusion. In a fast-paced culture where the pursuit of success can sometimes overshadow the slow, deliberate cultivation of character, Dominic's approach is a testament to the old-world values of accountability. He did not shield his daughter from the harsh truths of the world. He armed her with the intellectual and emotional discipline required to navigate them. When Roberta faced the ultimate betrayal at JFK Airport, Dominic was there not to coddle her, but to ground her. That is the presence of a parent who has raised a warrior, not a victim. Conversely, we have Patricia Pierce, the architect of her son's moral decay. Patricia represents a toxic permutation of family responsibility, one that equates protection with enabling. She utilized her generational wealth and elite social status to build a fortress around Nathan, shielding him from the consequences of his own actions. From covering up his indiscretions to actively funding the luxury apartment of his mistress, Patricia's parenting was devoid of fairness or emotional awareness. She raised a man who believed the rules of society and the sacred vows of marriage were mere suggestions, easily bypassed with the right amount of capital and maternal intervention. Nathan's arrogance's fatal flaw was not born in a vacuum. It was meticulously cultivated by a mother who taught him that he was the center of the universe and that other people, including his wife, were merely stepping stones or collateral damage. The collision between Roberta and Nathan is therefore not just a clash of husband and wife. It is the inevitable collision of these two opposing parenting philosophies. When a child raised with a profound sense of accountability meets a child raised with an unchecked sense of entitlement, the fallout is catastrophic. Nathan's descent into federal prison was paved by his mother's refusal to hold him accountable. Roberta's triumphant survival was engineered by her father's insistence on facing the cold, hard facts. This narrative forces us to reflect deeply on our own roles as guides, mentors, and caretakers. In a society that often measures a family's success by the zip code they live in, the prestigious colleges they attend, or the corporate titles they hold, the story of the Pierces serves as a chilling warning. Wealth cannot buy character. A pristine public image cannot mask a rotting moral foundation. If we fail to teach our youth the value of honesty, not just when it is easy, but when it is incredibly difficult, we are setting them up for a catastrophic fall. If we fail to instill fairness and empathy, we are not protecting them. We are isolating them in a delusion that reality will eventually and violently shatter. Emotional awareness is the cornerstone of a healthy family structure. It is the ability to recognize our own flaws, to understand the impact of our actions on those around us, and to take responsibility for the pain we cause. Dominic fostered this awareness in Roberta, allowing her to process her immense grief and channel it into a calculated, systemic pursuit of justice. Patricia smothered this awareness in Nathan, leaving him emotionally stunted, capable of forging deeds and plotting financial destruction without a single pang of conscience. The contrast is a stark reminder that our greatest responsibility to the next generation is not to leave them an inheritance of financial wealth, but an inheritance of moral fortitude. As we navigate the complexities of modern life, balancing careers, relationships, and the heavy mantle of family responsibility, we must ask ourselves which legacy we are building. Are we raising Robertas equipped to face the fires of betrayal with unyielding grace and intellect? Or are we raising Nathans, fragile and dependent on deceit, destined to collapse the moment the truth is brought to light? The choices we make in the quiet, mundane moments of parenting, the lies we let slide, the boundaries we enforce, the truths we demand, echo for decades. They determine not just the trajectory of their lives, but the lives of everyone they will touch. If you found yourself captivated by the intricate webs of betrayal, the pursuit of justice, and the deep psychological underpinnings of this story, there is so much more to explore. For more compelling narratives that dive into the darkest and most triumphant corners of the human experience, make sure to follow Samantha Told Stories. Join our community as we unravel tales that challenge our perceptions and keep us on the edge of our seats. Subscribe, like, and share to ensure you never miss a moment of the drama and the truth that lies beneath. Ultimately, the story of Roberta Rossi leaves us standing before a mirror, questioning the very nature of love and protection. We are taught from a young age that the highest calling of a parent is to protect their child from the harsh, unforgiving realities of the world. We are told to build safe harbors, to soften the blows, and to shield them from the pain that lurks outside our doors. It is a beautiful, deeply ingrained sentiment that drives the traditional family structure. But perhaps this conventional wisdom is a comforting lie. Perhaps the true unspoken burden of parenting is far heavier and far more daunting. If we look closely at the ashes of Nathan's life, we see the devastating result of a parent who succeeded in protecting her child from the world, but in doing so, she created a monster. The decisive, uncomfortable truth is this: a parent's ultimate responsibility is not to protect their child from the world. A parent's ultimate responsibility is to protect the world from their child. Only when we stop shielding them from their own shadows can we ensure they do not become the darkness in someone else's life.